Hello, my name is Kafui Dey. My guest is Kwesi Pratt Jr., journalist, political commentator, and media owner. But before the conversation, let me give you some news. So if you send money back home to Ghana, you need to hear this. Lemfi is the app to send money from the UK, Europe, Canada, or the US straight to Ghana with zero transfer fees. You can send directly to bank accounts or Momo, and your people back home receive it within minutes. The exchange rates are competitive, and the app is secure and safe to use. And here's a bonus. When you sign up and use my referral code Kafui, you get cash back on your first qualifying transfer. Plus, every time you send money, you earn reward points you can use to transact later. Download the Lemfi app now and use my code Kafui when you sign up. Mr. Kwesi Pratt Jr., happy to be here with you.
Happy to be here with you too.
I want us to jump out of Ghana and look at the world. There's currently a war going on between Israel and US on one side and Iran. First of all, how does that make you feel?
I feel very terrible. There's a completely needless war. It's a war which is not serving the interests of the people of the United States or even the people of Israel. There's a war which is against everything that mankind has stood for. And I think it's most despicable. Look, let's start from the United States of America. The US is definitely a power in decline. Its infrastructural deficit is huge. I mean, anybody who has recently visited the Underground Railway network in New York cannot help but see this decline. It's horrible. It's the worst underground railway system in any part of the modern world. US government itself says that its bridges are on the verge of collapse. They need to be redone. You come to look at the level of desperation on the streets of Washington. The unemployed people, the homeless people, the drug addicts and so on. Huge numbers. You're not talking about hundreds, you're talking about thousands. You understand? On the streets of Philadelphia, people who can't feed themselves, who depend on the soup, chicken, kitchen, and so on. You understand? Access to education is limited. The level of illiteracy in the US is huge. So come to think of it, this is a country which is spending billions, almost $2 billion a day, prosecuting an absolutely senseless war. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. Only a couple of days ago, Donald Trump actually is asking for $200 billion to go and explode bombs in the Gulf, kill people, put US soldiers at risk, and so on. How can this make sense?
Why do you think he is acting the way he's acting?
Because he's who he is. And who he is a president who is not properly informed about global affairs. It's a president whose thinking capacity is impaired. It's a president of the United States of America who sees himself more as an emperor than anything else. And let me explain. You see, the Venezuelan opposition leader, Machado, gets a Nobel Peace Prize. Trump believes that the prize rightly belongs to him and is able to bully this woman to surrender the prize to him. That's the kind of guy we're talking about. They're talking about a guy who becomes president of the United States of America, and one of his first pronouncements is that he wants to own the Panama Canal. And he's still pursuing that ambition. It doesn't end there. He actually wants Canada of all countries,
His neighbor,
to become the 52nd state of the United States of America. And it doesn't end there. He looks at the beautiful island of Cuba with 11 million people, and he says, look, my foreign minister will be the best president for Cuba. And we are beginning to wonder what is happening. It doesn't end there. He moves straight to Greenland and he says, I want Greenland. I'll buy it. But if they refuse to sell it to me, I'll take it by force of arms. And it doesn't end there. He sees Venezuela, one of the countries with the largest production of oil and so on. And he says, I want Venezuelan oil. He sends special forces into Venezuela. The president is abducted and taken to New York. And he says, Venezuelan oil belongs to me. And he actually makes a public announcement that anybody who wants to deal with Venezuela on its oil should not go to Caracas, but should come to him in Washington. And so, this is the guy we are talking about.
So where is the Israel connection? We've seen what you say Trump is, and why Israel?
Well, Israel has become a convenient bedfellow in this crazy, crazy move to dominate the world. And you must understand very clearly that Israel has territorial ambitions. I mean, only recently, a top official in Israel claimed that virtually the whole of the Middle East and the Gulf, and so on, belongs to Israel.
How?
You heard it.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, they said that God gave it to them.
Oh, okay.
And that's a strange claim, okay? It's a strange claim because the state of Israel was founded by the Zionist movement. The Zionist movement instigated the state of Israel. The leaders of the Zionist movement were atheists. They didn't believe that God exists. Now, if you don't believe that God exists, if God doesn't exist, how does God give you a gift?
Because he's not there.
He's not there, so he can't give you a gift. So how could atheists establish a state on the assumption that it's a gift from God that they don't believe in? It doesn't make sense. Now, when you come to discuss Israel, we in Africa ought to be a little more careful, okay? Because in the 1940s, when Britain and others were looking for land for the establishment of a Jewish state, Africa was considered. As a matter of fact, they wanted to establish that Jewish state in today's Uganda. So imagine if Israel had been established in Uganda. Then ask yourself, which land did God really give to the Israelis? Was it in Africa or it was in the Middle East? How could God have gifted a land not knowing where the land was located? If it's in Africa, it's in Africa. If it's not in Africa, it's not in Africa. So there's a whole lot of confusion. Now, because of this ambition, territorial ambition, the ambition to acquire more land and so on, Israel has been very, very aggressive. In 1948, it launched an offensive to drive out the indigenous Arabs, and that led to what is now known in history as the Nakba, the day of catastrophe. And hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were driven out of their homes and so on, in order for them to gain access to their land. I mean, the recent happenings in Gaza, everybody knows. I mean, even the UN, has taken a position. South Africa is leading the charge to ensure that Israel eventually gets charged with genocide and so on. So we know that. So given this reality and the reality of the United States of America under Donald Trump, there's a certain convenience which makes this convergence possible. And that's what we're seeing.
Why should Africans be concerned?
For many reasons. One, because Africans, like all people all over the world, believe in justice. We have a commitment to justice. We have a commitment to building a new world in which weapons of mass destruction have no place. We have a commitment to building a new world in which bullies are not tolerated. So that's on one level. The other level is just the impact. Over the last 3-4 days, the prices of fuel are shooting up at our pumps. That's a reality that Africans have to live with. We are told that this war would affect agriculture in a most dramatic way because fertilizers, chemical fertilizers, the supply of chemical fertilizers will be impeded. That's a fact. That would affect us. We believe, as Africans, in a rule-based international order, a world order that is certain, and so on. This is undermining that world order, and it is to the detriment of the African people, and so on. So that's the reality.
Who can stop the US and Israel?
The working people of the world are the only people who are the final arbiters in all of these struggles. It's the working people of the world who produce the instruments of violence. It's the working people of the world who are going to produce the $200 billion that Donald Trump needs to control to continue this war and so on.
Do you think he can't just print the money? Go to that. Just print more dollars for me.
Yeah, but there's no printing press in Donald Trump's bedroom. It's still the working people who will print the money. You understand? So if the working people decide that they would not work for bigots, they would not work for warmongers, they would not work for systems of governments which are oppressive and imperialistic in nature, it will come to an end. And that day will soon come.
You've been to Venezuela before.
Yes.
What was it like when you visited that country?
Well, the first time I went to Caracas, Venezuela, was the time when the Chavez fever was gripping everybody.
Former President Hugo Chavez.
Hugo Chavez. Chavez had taken power and has started a reconstruction project which is supported by the vast majority of the Venezuelan people. There was a lot of enthusiasm everywhere in Caracas for building a new Venezuela and so on. That was the first time I went to Venezuela. Now, subsequently, I've been to Venezuela on many occasions. I think on 3 occasions as part of the international observer team to observe their elections. So I have practical experience. Traveled around the country supervising or observing, elections and so on. And I've been there for conferences and so on,
You hear from the press in the US and Europe that the elections are flawed. But if you observe the elections, is there a disconnect with what they say and what you saw?
But what I saw as an election observer was absolutely free and fair elections. And mind you, I was not the only person who was there. I was part of the African team, observer team. There was the European observer team, and there was a North American observer team, and so on. And all of us came to the conclusion that the elections we had observed were free and fair. In fact, better organized than elections in the United States of America, and so on. But don't listen to me. Listen to Donald Trump. If you want to have a verdict on the quality of the elections which were held in Venezuela, don't listen to me. Listen to Donald Trump. You see, Nicolas Maduro is abducted and taken to New York for trial. And Donald Trump is dealing with the deputy president under Nicolas Maduro. And there are questions, and they asked him, why? Why are you not recognizing the people who you claim won the elections as the legitimate government of Venezuela? What was Donald Trump's response? He said, they have no credibility. The people of Venezuela don't respect them. I'm sure you heard that.
Yes.
So if the people of Venezuela don't respect the opposition, think that the opposition has no credibility and so on, how could they have won the elections? So don't listen to me, listen to Donald Trump. Donald Trump provides the answers. He says that the Venezuelan opposition has no credibility. It is not respected by the Venezuelan people. And that it's better to do business with the Maduro administration. And that is why since the abduction of Maduro, he's doing business with the remnants of the Maduro administration.
So your reading of the abduction of the Venezuelan head of state is, and the reason for that is?
And Donald Trump has said that also very clearly, to control Venezuelan resources. You understand? To control Venezuelan resources. Donald Trump has announced to the world that he is in charge of Venezuelan oil, that the U.S. will sell Venezuelan oil. and that all their national requirements, national imports and so on should come through the U.S. Clear. That's the reason for taking over Venezuela.
What is the reaction of the Venezuelan people?
From what I know, at least 200 people were killed in the effort to abduct Nicolas Maduro, which suggests that there was a fight. About 33 Cubans or so were killed in the process of abducting Nicolas Maduro. They used their most sophisticated arsenal. If you listen to the guards, they were blinded. They couldn't hear because they used sound impairing, equipment and so on. They used everything in their arsenal. That does not suggest an easy ride, for the forces which entered Caracas to capture Maduro. But since then, what has happened? The streets of Venezuela are controlled almost entirely by the colectivos and the Chavistas. Why is the Venezuelan opposition? Why is the Venezuelan opposition? Why is it manifesting? Even at the point where the U.S. is holding a gun to the head of the leaders of Venezuela, you don't find opposition manifestations.
How do you think it will end with President Maduro?
I'm not so sure that he's likely to get a fair trial. But if he got a fair trial, there's no evidence against him for involvement in narco trade and so on. So you have to be discharged. You have to go home a free person. But even if there's an unfair trial, the world, the progressive world, the world of nationalists, the world of genuine Democrats, the world of socialists and so on, is mobilizing around the clock and putting pressure on the U.S. for its release. One day, ultimately, maybe sooner, Nicolas Maduro will be released like many others before him.
How do you think the Iran, the Israel-U.S. conflict will pan out?
I don't know. I've never been a soothsayer, and I don't intend to be one. What is clear today is that the calculations of the U.S. and Israel are not much enough. In the beginning, the claim was that this whole war was going to take 3 days. And then it was extended to 1 week, and then 2 weeks. Now we are hearing from the Pentagon that this war could last until September, end of September. And that's only an estimation, you understand? This could end up being one of the forever wars that Donald Trump was against.
Will the American people punish him at the midterm elections, do you think?
Oh, certainly. And Trump is panicking. I mean, the Republicans are panicking about what the possibility would be in the midterm elections. I mean, everybody knows that. They are panicking. Because you see, fuel prices in some states have moved from a little over $2 to $8 a gallon.
Times 4.
Yeah. In some states, averagely petroleum prices in the U.S. as of yesterday was around $4 or $5 a gallon. That's a huge increase. Okay? One of the reasons why people in the United States voted for Trump was that he promised to deal with the cost of living crisis. He's worsened it. He's worsened it. And there are people from his own mega movement who think that this war is particularly senseless.
And the Europeans don't want to help him. He's appealing for help.
How can they? You see, we ought to understand what is happening in the world very clearly. As we speak, Donald Trump is supporting the far right in Britain against the established political parties, the Labour Party and the Conservatives. He wants them out of power to be replaced by the far right. So he's at loggerheads with the government in the United Kingdom. As we speak, Donald Trump is supporting the far right in France and Germany against the established political parties. How does he expect parties that he's subverting to come to his aid? In any case, they were not even consulted before he unleashed this war. And he's been most critical of the governments there and most insulting to the leaders in these countries. Let's take the case of Spain. The US has a military base in Spain. When it got its back against the wall, it wanted to use the military base in Spain to attack Iran and makes the request. And the Spanish leadership says, no, we will not allow you to use the military base here for this, your reckless war. What is his reaction? You know his reaction. Donald Trump then says that, oh, the people of Spain are very sensible and so on, but their leaders are stupid. You heard him say that.
I did.
Yes. How can he cooperate with the leadership of Spain?
So he's boxed himself into a corner.
How can he cooperate with the leadership in Britain when he's been most insulting, his comments have been most degrading? He doesn't respect any other world leader except Putin.
Is that odd?
Not odd at all. I mean, if you understand international relations and so on, it's not odd at all. I mean, Putin belongs to a special category. You understand? I listened to one of the leaders of the European Union describe an encounter with Putin. And she says that if you're going to have a meeting with Putin, you have to prepare extra. Otherwise, you'll be embarrassed. Now, this is a guy who walks into a meeting without notes. And he knows every subject under the sun in detail. So you don't trip before Putin. Putin was well prepared for leadership. He understands the world. His depth of knowledge is beyond people like Trump and so on. You know, Putin is a master of the game, especially having worked with the Soviet intelligence services and risen to the rank of a colonel and so on. And he's been around for a long time. He worked as the chief of staff of Boris Yeltsin and so on. He's a special category. He belongs to a special category. You understand? Mm-hmm. And God knows when he meets with Donald Trump, the kind of conversations they have. What does he tell him? Because every time he's met with Donald Trump has come out to the meeting praising Putin to the high heavens. In fact, last week, I read a statement which had been made by Donald Trump, and it was interesting. Donald Trump is saying that, look, Zelensky should learn from Putin, and that somebody should go and tell Zelensky to learn how to make deals.
The Ukrainian president?
Yes, how to make deals. And that Putin is ready to make deals. The problem is Zelensky. This is Donald Trump. What has he seen in Putin? What has Putin said to him or done to him? Nobody knows. We will never know. Perhaps we will never know.
And now that you brought Zelensky in, I mean, what is the fate of that whole conflict? Because now it seems that the whole attention is now in the Middle East, but there's a Ukraine-Russia conflict raging on, and America is involved in some way.
It's another completely needless conflict. We shouldn't have had that war. Averting that war was very simple and easy. Look, all that NATO had to do was to concretely assure Russia that it was not interested in attacking Russia, and there would have been no war. But they kept boasting that we're going to station weapons in Ukraine which could hit Moscow in 3 minutes. Yeah. Who is going to sit down and allow that? Who, in his right senses, is going to sit down for any country or any group of countries to go and plant weapons in a nearby country which can hit their capital in 3 minutes?
It's not going to happen, yeah.
You understand? Mm-hmm. So this war was avoidable. This war has also had very serious repercussions, especially for Europe. I mean, Germany's economy was on the rise. Today, Germany's economy is tumbling as a result of this war. The Europeans have had to pump billions of euros into this war, and they are going nowhere. They are also doing this at a time when the unemployment rate is rising in their countries, Britain is running an inflationary rate of about 30%. And yet they are compelled to look for resources to pump into Ukraine. It doesn't make any sense at all. So it's a completely needless war. It's a war which should never have been fought. And they should have allowed diplomacy, to take the center stage. And there would have been no war.
And it's now over 4 years.
And we don't see any solution in sight. That's the sad part of it.
Yeah.
And listen, now, in the negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, one of the cardinal things that is being discussed is how much land Ukraine is ready to cede to Russia. If you are going to cede land now, why did you fight? What did you fight for? It doesn't make sense. And sometimes when I sit back and look at the world and developments in the world, I just wonder the caliber of people who have assumed the leadership of the world today.
You're disappointed, eh?
Well, disappointment is a very mild word. I just wonder. I mean, you can no longer find the Sukarnos.
Indonesia, yeah.
You can no longer find the Lenins. The Nkrumahs are off the stage, the Modibo Ketas, and so on. You can't find them anywhere. These great leaders have been replaced by Trump. These great leaders have been replaced by Jesus Christ. It's shocking how within a space of 50 years, the quality of leadership around the world has changed so dramatically. Where can you find a Fidel Castro today?
Did you ever meet him?
No, I never met Fidel, which is,
You would have loved. What kind of conversations would you have had with him?
Well, I've seen Fidel at a distance. I've been at conferences when he's standing. I've been at conferences where he's standing at the podium and talking to us, but not a one-on-one conversation. I've actually received an honorary award signed by him. It was supposed to be presented by him.
Okay.
But then he had this accident, I think the week before I was to go to Havana to receive the award, so it was presented by somebody else and so on. But Fidel is a remarkable leader. I mean, so charismatic, and it's not just about his charisma is not empty. Very well informed, very well read, understands the world like the back of his hand, and so on. And there have been so many such great leaders around the world.
So the world misses great people like this.
Of course. Look at what the world has become.
How about
After 1945, the Second World War, the end of the Second World War, there was a lot of hope that this world could be reset and that we have a better world that we had, which led to the First and Second World Wars and so on. There was a lot of hope. There was the surge of the national liberation movements, the gaining of independence by many countries in Africa and so on. There was a lot of hope. All of that hope is withered away. And that's a big problem.
I'll ask you a couple of questions on one of the great leaders who you admire. But just before that, I'm thinking about just on current contemporary issues. Where's the role of China in all that we see right now? Russia, Ukraine, Israel, USAV, Iran, abduction of Venezuela's president. What's the role of China in all of this?
China has a foreign policy which serves its interests the best, but which many people around the world actually feel that it's not helping to reset the world. China's foreign policy is basically non-interventionist.
They don't interfere?
No. China feels that all countries, all people should be able to solve their problems. China argues that its model of development is based on the Chinese reality, and that no country must be compelled to adopt China's model of development. My understanding is that today, China is focusing attention on its own development, satisfying the needs of its people, improving its own national infrastructure, and so on. And China is doing very, very well.
And they have a lot of people to take care of.
Oh, wow. But China is doing very, very well. I mean, anybody who has been to Shanghai would not sacrifice Shanghai for New York. I mean, the difference is huge. You know, I was in Shanghai during the hurricane. You know, and I was in my hotel and saw the force of the hurricane, trees being uprooted and so on. Total chaos on the streets of Shanghai. My brother, 45 minutes after the hurricane, there was no sign that the hurricane had passed through Shanghai. The streets were clean, the debris had been removed, and so on.
45 minutes.
45 minutes after the hurricane had passed through Shanghai. You understand? So this is the reality. I mean, China is making advances, you know, serious advances, and China doesn't want to be distracted. Now, because of this posture, the forces of imperialism appear to have a lot of strength. Because China is not confronting anybody. China is allowing them, you know, to do as they please and so on. To some extent, that's very sensible policy, okay? But to another extent, I think that we would have wished that China did a lot more in the protection of vulnerable states. One of the things that I say about Chinese foreign policy is simply this. Well, you don't want to go to war over Venezuela, fine. You don't want to go to war over Iran, fine. You would not send your troops to protect African countries, fine. That's your decision, okay? But what about the diplomatic effort? Why is China not using its veto power in the UN to block the US on many crucial issues? So I think that it's important for China to step up its game, at least at the level of diplomacy, and use its power in multilateral institutions and so on to checkmate the forces of imperialism to the benefit of third world countries and so on.
Now let's come back to the continent, because this year, 2026, marks the 60th anniversary of the overthrow of the great Pan-African and socialist leader, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. How does that make you feel, 60 years after his demise from political power?
Well, I was a young boy when the coup occurred, and I saw the coup live.
You did?
Yes.
Where were you? Which part of Ghana were you in?
We were staying in Kutubabi, what is today referred to as Kutubabi Down. Okay. And my father was a trade union leader.
Is he the senior to you? Kwesi Pratt Jnr.?
Well, he's
The
just Kwesi Pratt.
And then you are the junior?
Yes.
Okay.
So he was a trade union leader. And in those days, the trade union leaders used to fly the trade union flag, which was very powerful. I mean, if you saw the trade union flag, you knew who they were.
What were the colors?
Yes.
What were the colors of the flag, trade union flag?
Oh, I think there was yellow in it, there was green in it, and there was a bit of red in it,
Okay.
and white, you know, but it was, you know, the trade union flag. So I remember at dawn, you know, being woken up because the coup was being announced by, I think, Kutuka then, you know, the coup was announced. I heard the first statement made by General Ankara, and so on. And then somehow, out of recklessness or anxiety or whatever, my father decided to drive out of the house. So he went into his Simca. You know Simca?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. Went into his Simca, drove out of the house, and in a few minutes came back with bullet holes in the car. Because the flag was still flying.
Of course.
Okay. I don't know where he wanted to go, why he went out of the house, but he came back with bullet holes in the car.
Wow.
Those of us, young people around that time, then gathered ourselves and decided to go around, you know, seeing what was happening. One of the first places we went was the house of Abavana. Abavana used to be a minister in the Nkrumah government. You know, if you're coming from Pikva,
Yes.
he has a house there.
And that's why the place is called Abavana Junction.
Abavana Junction and Abavana Down. We were at Abavana Down, you know. So we went up there. And we saw the arrest of people in the house. I saw it with my own eyes. Saw them beaten. I saw the blood oozing out of their nose and so on. Horrible scenes. From there, we then walked all the way to the Kanda estates, where the military were carrying out some operations.
Right behind Flagstaff House.
Behind Flagstaff House, the story buildings, And I saw them pound the nozzle of their armored vehicles and fire, and I saw furniture tumbling to the ground and so on, horrific scenes. Then we came back to what is today the Accra New Town Station. And there's a story building just right by the post office, and where some of the security personnel were living. And I saw how they were arrested, how they were molested and beaten and so on. I saw all of that. I saw the panic which had been created in society and how Nkrumah supporters and CPP members and so on were burying their paraphernalia. Is that how we say it?
Yes, paraphernalia.
You were burying them.
Their ID cards and
ID
cards,
scarves and so on were being buried and so on. Out of fear.
Hide the evidence.
Yes.
That you are an Nkrumahist.
Because they will come for you. They will beat you up. They killed a few. They killed quite a lot of people. They arrested people and put them in detention without trial and committed all manner of atrocities and so on. I remember that very, very clearly, One of the things that left a lasting impression on me was the arrest of a guy called Boy Moses. Boy Moses was a confidant of Nkrumah. He had been arrested, and the junta decided to make an example of him. So they built an iron cage, put him in the cage like a monkey, and tied his cage to a moving vehicle and drove him across the streets of Accra.
What was the reaction of the people watching this?
You had to cheer. How dare you? They had to cheer. I mean, this was one of the most repressive moments in our history. Can you imagine a government arresting a human being, putting him in an iron cage, tying him to a moving vehicle and driving him across the streets of Accra? Horrendous, but it happened. There are the stories of pregnant women who were arrested and dumped into prison without charge or trial, who delivered in prison. There are many. I'm sure you know some of the stories yourself. So this was the period. But for me, one of the most significant things later, growing up and learning the facts and so on, is the reason for the coup d'etat. We are told that Nkrumah was overthrown because he was a dictator, because he had established a one-party state, and so on. Forget that. The reason is provided for in a cable which was sent by the British High Commissioner in Accra in 1961 to his home government. The British High Commissioner's name is A.W. Snelling. A.W. Snelling sent a cable to his home government urging them to speed up the process of toppling Nkrumah. He said they had to get rid of Nkrumah because he was making the African too politically conscious.
This is back in 61.
1961, September 21st, 1961.
His birthday.
This is the date on which A.W. Snelling sent that cable to his government, that they should speed up with the process of getting rid of Nkrumah. Because he was making the African too politically conscious. That was the reason for the overthrow of Nkrumah. Of course, now we also have access to the declassified documents of the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States of America. And it's clear that none of those reasons was true. I'm sure you've seen something, the British intelligence discussing J.W.K. Halley and his capabilities. I'm sure you've seen it. It's been published all over the place.
Yeah.
They didn't even believe that the people had any capability, the people who had overthrown Nkrumah. I had the privilege of interviewing A.K. Deku.
The IGP.
Yeah. A few weeks before he died at his hometown. and that interview is available. And I asked him a very specific question. I said, what do you think of Nkrumah? And he said, Nkrumah is one of the best leaders that Africa has had. This is one of the persons who took part in planning the coup. And he tells me, and the interview is available, it's on YouTube, that Nkrumah is one of the best leaders that Africa has had.
Did he know that when he was planning the coup?
I asked him, so why did you overthrow him?
Yes.
And his answer is that if he hadn't joined the conspiracy, he would have been killed. That the people who were planning to overthrow Nkrumah were so vicious they had reached the point of desperation. And that when he was contacted, he had only two options, staying alive and dying. And staying alive meant that he had to go along with the conspiracy. Okay. So this is AK Deku. This is not me. This is AK Deku. You understand? And I'm happy that it was recorded.
Yes,
this
indeed.
interview was recorded and it's available. I recorded it actually for TV3. You understand? That's not all. I mean, a lot more was revealed in that interview. And one of the revelations that I found most interesting was that the person at the center of the conspiracy to overthrow Nkrumah, at the center of the CIA and Western intelligence plot, was not Kotoka. It was not Afrifa. It was not Hali himself. It was a guy called Major Kwashi. Major Kwashi, who worked at the 37 military hospital. So all of the meetings of the conspirators were held in Major Kwashi's house. Until then, I didn't even know. I had never heard of the name Major Kwashi because he just evaporated. I don't know why, but the center of that conspiracy was a Major Kwashi who then worked at the 37 military hospital.
And after the coup, what happened to him?
I don't know. He just vanished.
Like a dwarf?
I've been trying to find out what happened to that Major Kwashi.
Paint us a picture of life before the 66 coup. You were born in the early 50s. What was life like in Ghana?
Well, I can only tell you from the perspective of a child. I mean, I must have been around 12, 13 years when the coup happened.
Yes.
So I couldn't be telling you about, the economic statistics at the time and so on.
But just your personal life as a
personal
little boy. What was growing up in the 50s like?
I was a member of the Young Pioneer Movement.
What was that like?
And it was, how would I describe it? It was everything a child would hope for. In the Young Pioneer Movement, we had cultural groups. So those who were inclined were assisted, to drum, to sing, and so on. There were drama groups, those who engaged in the production of plays, and so on. There were study groups, people who studied our history, and so on. There were even boxing clubs.
In the Young Pioneers?
In the Young Pioneer Movement, we were taught to box, and so on. It was clear that this movement's main purpose was to groom and produce leaders for the future. In all fields, football, boxing, athletics, table tennis, all of that.
Which of the groups were you part of?
I did boxing.
Nice.
Yeah, I did boxing. I started boxing very, very early,
Okay.
in the Young Pioneer Movement. Actually, I never graduated to the Young Pioneer Movement. There was the African Personality Call, which was the first stage for younger people.
Okay.
And then you joined the Young Pioneer Movement at a little more advanced age.
So primary school level, you'd be part of African
so
Personality.
I was in the African Personality Call, and I did some boxing, and so on, and did many other things.
Okay. How was this organized? At the school level or in the community, the Young Pioneers?
In my school,
Okay.
there was no Young Pioneer branch in my school.
Where was your school?
Barnes Memorial Institute. There was no Young Pioneer, but we would close from school and join others at the New Times Experimental, where there was an active Young Pioneer group. So we moved from school to school, to the centers where the Young Pioneer activity was going on, and we became part of the Young Pioneer movement. Now, many of the things that I've hung on to in my life, in terms of ideas and aspiration and so on, I would say with certainty came from the Young Pioneer movement. I mean, a strong sense of Pan-Africanism was inculcated into us. We were made to believe that it was almost wrong to feel more Ghanaian than African.
You should be African first.
African first. Even at that age, we felt more African than Ghanaian, and so on. I thought that was a good thing. I've not regretted, going through that kind of training, And then somehow we were made to believe very, very strongly that the people who are defeated are the people who give up. And if you look at our history, throughout our history, from the 1940s to now, we never give up. We've never given up. In spite of the 1966 coup, in spite of the fact that a law was enacted which made it a criminal offense to print, hold, or distribute Nkrumah's photograph, we never gave up.
Just a photo?
Yeah. It was a criminal offense to print, hold, or distribute Nkrumah's photograph. You go to prison for that. But we never gave up. I recall that it was around 1969, I hope I'm right, that Johnny F.S. Hansen and Dr. Lutrot actually defied the law and printed thousands of copies of Nkrumah photographs and distributed it openly and dared the authorities to arrest them.
Did they?
They didn't arrest them, but they dared the authorities to arrest them. So that spirit of defiance has lived with us up to today. And that spirit of defiance and resistance is perhaps ultimately what will lead to the building of that new Ghana and perhaps that new Africa.
How did the 66 coup affect your father?
Well, he stayed in the labor movement, okay, but the labor movement had a lot of problems. First, there was the attempt to ban the TUC, which didn't succeed. There were many attempts. The TUC's strength derived from the Industrial Relations Act of 1965, which was seriously amended, and which now recognizes that anybody can set up any union. For example, in the GBC, there was one union, the Public Services Workers Union. Today, it is possible for workers in the GBC to belong to different unions as a result of the new architecture. Now, that means weakening the trade unions,
Instead of one group, then you have splinters.
Splinters and so on. Beyond that, the Industrial Relations Act of 1965 was so seriously amended that labor leaders felt that, they were going for them and so on. So at some point, I've forgotten the year and the date, but at some point, the labor leaders then decided to organize what they then called Operation 0 Hour.
What did that mean?
Operation 0 Hour, it was the declaration of a nationwide strike and agitation in order to bring down the new regime. And this led to a number of arrests of labor leaders and so on. I can't remember the most of the details then. I was too young, But I remember clearly that the labor leaders wanted to organize what was then known as Operation 0 Hour, and that it led to arrest and so on. And the labor movement was decimated. One of the things that I remember after today is the fact that, that the celebration of May Day was banned.
After the coup?
After the coup.
No way.
May Day was banned. as a communist activity. Okay. Now, what is interesting is that the TUC had this gentleman, he was called Hineku, Ofe Hineku, who had been at the center of the planning for May Day and so on. The government set up a committee to investigate May Day celebrations. And the committee, yeah, for real, the committee came up with the idea that the celebration of May Day was a communist activity and that the state should not have supported it. So Mr. Hineku was asked to refund the expenditure which had been incurred for all the period that he has supervised the planning of May Day celebrations. Sounds incredible.
It's ludicrous.
Yeah, but it's true. Yeah.
What was the philosophy of the state at that time? They were obviously anti-communist. So what did they say they were?
Well, they proclaimed capitalism in different forms and using different lexicon and so on. You know, but clearly their path was the path of extreme, capitalism. And I will illustrate. You see, after the coup, in fact, before the coup, Nkrumah had established these guerrilla camps across the country where national liberation fighters from Angola, from Mozambique, and so on were being trained to take up arms against the colonial authorities
Indeed.
in those countries and so on. After the coup, these camps were discontinued, And some of the leaders of these camps were actually arrested and sent back to the colonial authorities in their countries. I'm told that some of them were killed. And so on.
Yeah.
Okay, that happened. In fact, the coup leaders and those who inherited them described these camps as subversive camps. Subversive camps. Okay, so this happened. But the most interesting development, I think, happened after 1969, the 1969 elections, when the Progress Party came to power. That was the height of the struggle against apartheid. And there was a clamor around the world to impose full-blown sanctions on the apartheid regime. In fact, the OAU had decided that we should impose full sanctions on the apartheid regime. Can you believe that the government of Ghana decided not to follow the world in imposing sanctions on apartheid?
Who were they following?
Obviously the US, So the government of Ghana then decided that they wanted to do business with apartheid and said that apartheid could only be overthrown if we collaborated with apartheid and did business with apartheid and so on. Of course, to be fair, I remember that Mr. Victor Wusu, who was then the foreign minister in the Busia administration, opposed Busia. Actually, publicly opposed Busia.
Did he still keep his job after that opposition?
I think he did, I think he did, But then his government supported dialogue with apartheid, which was considered an atrocious crime in the world. At the height of apartheid.
Indeed.
They wanted to do business with apartheid. But this is part of the reality. This is one of the consequences we suffered as a result of the 1966 coup.
Are we on our way to recovery from that coup?
I'm not sure. I mean, a lot more people are getting enlightened. A lot more people are beginning to become advocates for a united Africa. But we are not there yet. Look, by the February 24, 1966 coup, the nucleus of the United States of Africa had already emerged. Ghana, Mali, and Guinea were one country. Ghana, Mali, and Guinea had formed a confederation. And that is why it was so easy for Nkrumah to move as president of Ghana, go to Guinea and become president of Guinea, co-president of Guinea, and so on. The union, the base of the union had been established. Recently found documents, I haven't read them myself, but I'm told by those who have read those documents, that by February 24, 1966, the Congo had also agreed to join this confederation. So at least you had 4 states in Africa agreeing to join a confederation of African states, a new clause. Where are we today? We are so far away from that dream. In fact, the closest to that dream is the alliance of Sahel states, which is not ideologically and politically motivated. It's an alliance for the survival of those states. Just pure survival mechanism, which is different from what Nkrumah, Modibo Keita, Sekou Touré, and Patrice Lumumba wanted to do.
So how do you feel about the African Union in 2026?
You know, some of these views, sometimes we like to keep them to ourselves, because we don't want to unruffle feathers and so on. But let me sum it up. When I saw the statement issued by the African Union on the Israel-American aggression against Iran, I was shocked and embarrassed. African Union jumping right in the middle, not taking sides, and making statements to the effect that, oh, we have to go back to diplomacy and so on. Absolute rubbish. You understand? This African Union is very weak. And it is weak because Africa today has weak leaders. Africa today has leaders who cannot dream big, who are afraid of the empire. Look at the African leaders we have today. It's sad, you know.
Is there any hope amongst the 54 for you?
Well, Ibrahim Traore is saying the right things. Ibrahim Traore is saying the right things. But sometimes I wonder if he has the mass movement that is necessary for carrying out what he says. You know, sometimes I wonder if he has the political, organizational infrastructure that would enable him to pursue the dreams of Sankara and Kwame Nkrumah.
Does he have the mass following of the Burkinabe?
It appears so. I mean, and it's not just Burkina Faso. I mean, I was at the Russia-Africa Summit in St. Petersburg. So I'm standing in the corridor, and the African leaders keep coming, and nothing happens. You know, they just pass like ordinary people and go into the conference hall and so on. And then all of a sudden, the place starts shaking. Something is extraordinary is happening. You know, everybody is moving, running, and so on. I said, what is happening? I said, Traore is coming. I mean, that was a very important lesson. Traore was the toast of the Africa-Russia Summit. When he appeared, the whole place shook. That's an indication of something, isn't it?
It is. Similar to what happened on the 7th of January 2025 when at the President Mahama's inauguration.
Yeah, but that's small compared to what I saw in St. Petersburg.
But the kind of bubble
and everywhere.
Bubbling.
I mean, I was speaking to a presidential candidate of an African country. I won't mention, you know, it's only 2 weeks ago. And he asked me whether I have the connection to Traore. Of course, I don't have. I've never met him before. I don't know him. So I said, why? He said, well, he just wants to take a photograph with Traore. And that if that photograph is published in his country, half his work
is done
as a presidential candidate would have been done. You understand? So this is Traore. This is the impact he's making in Africa and the world.
Why does he have that magnetism? Why do people want to associate with him?
Because he's opposed to imperialism. Because he's anti-imperialist. The African people are necessarily anti-imperialist. You understand? Listen, let me give you just one example. All former colonies of France, they keep their foreign reserves in the Central Bank of France. What this actually means is that sometimes when they go to France to borrow money, they are borrowing their own money. So they borrow their own money from France and pay interest on it. Who can accept this? This is untenable. This is not something anybody can accept. And this is what people like Traore are fighting. They're fighting for independence. Look, Niger, before the coup d'etat, was classified as the poorest of one of the 3 poorest countries in the world. 1 year after the coup d'etat and joining the alliance of Sahel states and so on, Niger is the fastest growing economy in the world. That tells you something. You know?
Answer right there. Is it hard to be a Pan-Africanist now in 2026?
It's difficult. Okay, there are different kinds of Pan-Africanists.
What type are you?
I'm the Nkrumahist type of Pan-Africanist, and our work is more difficult.
Why?
Because we do not accept the current paradigm of development. We want a new paradigm of development. If I want to go back to the 5th Pan-African Congress in Manchester in 1945, its final resolution is our guide. And the final resolution talks about fighting for the independence, political independence of African states and so on. And the definition of independence in the resolution of the 5th Pan-African Congress is that Africans must own their resources and exploit these resources for their own benefit. Okay. But then it sees the second phase. And the second phase is that after independence, we need to build a United States of Africa under the banner of scientific socialism.
What is scientific socialism?
Scientific socialism is, I want to sound as simple as possible.
Yes. There's a 16-year-old who is listening. Break it down for him.
Scientific socialism, first of all, recognizes history as a science. And therefore says that developments ought to be guided by the science of history. Okay. And then the second principle is the interconnectedness of things, which in philosophical language is referred to as dialectics. Okay. Simply means that everything is connected to everything. Nothing exists on its own. That phenomena, everything is connected, the interconnectedness of things and so on. So these are the 2 guiding principles. Now, this study would then lead to the assumption that society is made up of classes, which are engaged in constant struggle. And all of us either knowingly or unknowingly work to promote the interests of one class or the other. For scientific socialists, the conscious decision is made to struggle alongside the working class. That perhaps, I hope I managed to explain.
It's broken down.
Yeah.
It's broken down.
Yeah.
You're known to be a journalist. Did you always want to be a journalist?
You see, Kafui, to be honest with you, sometimes I don't know who I am. And I'm honest about it.
Okay.
You know. There's no way one person can be only one thing. I'm a driver. I drive. I think I drive very well. You know.
Fast?
Dependent on the circumstance, but I drive. And I trust my driving. I've been driving since the early 70s. Okay. You know, I was driving very, very early. Okay. You know. So I drive, so I'm a driver. Okay. I'm a cook.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, I cook.
What's your signature dish?
I cook many things. I cook many, many things. My friends, I had a friend who virtually ate my pancakes every day.
Oh, you're a pancake man.
Yeah, I mean, Kasule, Yakubu Kasule, the late Yakubu Kasule. So Yakubu Kasule would ask me to prepare pancakes for 2 weeks for him. So I would do that. And when it finishes, he would come back and so on. And so he liked my pancake. But I have friends who don't like my pancake, who like my jollof.
Okay.
and so on. So I cook many things. I cook traditional dishes like epiti.
What's a pity?
Epiti is a dish which is made from ripe plantain and flour and pepper and so on. You know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Must be delicious.
Yeah. I cook epiti. It's fried. You know. It's fried. No. That's not epiti. That's epiti is actually made from corn.
Okay.
Corn dough and sugar.
Corn dough and sugar.
Corn dough and sugar.
Wow. Where did you learn how to cook?
At home, you know, at home.
Mom?
Mom, my dad used to cook. Everybody in my house cooks. So
okay.
we cook a lot, you know. I cook all kinds of things. I mean, terimu. I don't know if you ever heard about terimu. Terimu is also made from ripened plantain and flour and so on, but it's baked, you know, with palm oil and so on. So I cook all kinds of things.
Still cooking? Yeah,
Yeah,
what was the last dish you made?
Oh, last week I did some grills, but grills are not.
It's just heat and meat, eh?
It doesn't require fantastic skills. I mean, what you have to be skillful about is how to, you know, spice the meat.
Okay.
You know, that's the trick.
Okay.
But putting it on the fire and turning doesn't require any special skills, you know. Yeah. But I cook.
So you drive, you cook. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I write.
Yes.
So I'm a writer of some sort. Okay.
You wrote a book on reparations.
Yes, I wrote a book on reparations. I think it's been very, very successful. I'm sure you know.
Yes. What touched you to write that book?
Well, a friend, you know, we're having a conversation about reparations and so on. And then the friend said, look, I had to put down what I was saying because it was so important, it shouldn't be lost. So initially I set out to write an essay, you know, an essay for publication in the newspapers. Mm-hmm. And then I found out that I had so much material, you know, and then it went on, and then it got published as a book. I've been lucky for many reasons. One, the sitting president, John Dramani Mahama, decided to write the foreword. So it gave the book a lot of weight. I mean, to get a president writing the foreword to your book gives it a lot of weight. Mm-hmm. Mm. And then he accepted to launch it. That's another weight.
Yeah, big deal.
And then I went to Malabo, you know, Equatorial Guinea, to launch the book at the AU summit, and he was there. And he personally distributed the book to his colleague heads of states. In fact, he confessed that he actually signed the autographed it for his colleague heads of states.
Nice.
Because he couldn't find me. He was looking for me and couldn't find me.
That's
and the heads of states wanted the book to be autographed. So he autographed it for them and so on. He said this publicly and so on. Mm-hmm. So this book was published. There's a lot of requests for it, you know, and I was wondering how to handle it. And I said, look, let's take it to Amazon. Amazon has a network and so on. So I handed the book over to Amazon, and in a matter of months, it got the 5-star rating on Amazon.
Why do you think the book is so successful?
Well, because reparations has become a major topic now in international affairs and so on. There's not much literature on reparations, that is one. Two, the apparent endorsement of the Ghanaian head of state added weight to it. Mm-hmm. Three, it was launched at an AU heads of state summit, and therefore it gained a lot of gravitas, you know. And then since then, I've been practically around the world talking about reparations. I've been to South Africa, I've been to Addis Ababa, I've been everywhere.
What surprises you about the reparations conversation?
Well, what surprises me first and foremost is the level of ignorance. You know, the level of ignorance. I mean, I meet people who tell me that, why do you want reparations and so on? They tend to think that reparations is about the payment of monetary compensation.
Like some big cash out.
And that can only come out of ignorance and the lack of appreciation of the issues. Reparation is not about monetary compensation. Reparation is about a reset of the world. That's what it's about. It's about a reset of the world. You know, look, and I'll give you a few examples. Africa has 1.4 billion people. And yet, Africa has no meaningful voice on the United Nations. Why? Because at the time that the United Nations was being set up, the United Nations and all its agencies, World Bank, IMF, WTO, and so on, when they were being set up, we were colonies. So we were not at the table. So our interests were not taken into account. If we have to reset the world, we have to reset the United Nations. There is no reason why 1.4 billion people should not have a voice on the UN Security Council and so on. So it's about resetting the world. You know, if you look at the world today, the richest institutions, the most resourceful institutions and so on, ask how they came to accumulate that wealth. Came through our exploitation, through the transatlantic slave trade. You understand? You take an institution like the Catholic Church. Where does the wealth of the Catholic Church come from? The wealth of the Catholic Church comes from the fact that the Catholic Church was a partner to Portugal in the adventurism which eventually led to the transatlantic slave trade. Indeed, the justification for slavery and colonialism was provided for in the papal bull of 1452, signed by the Pope, authorizing King Alfonso of Portugal to go around the world civilizing us and so on. That's where the justification is. Okay. So that led also to the building of institutions which denigrated our science, which destroyed our science, institutions which devalued our spirituality, and so on and so forth. So many things. We need to reset. Look, fast forward. All of us hear about this big bank, Barclays Bank. When you hear about Barclays Bank, you look at it with awe.
Now after.
Yeah. You go there and you see them, you know, in their suits and white shirts and so on, looking prim and proper and so on. Barclays Bank was established by the Barclay brothers, who were slave traders. The money which established Barclays Bank, slave trading money. Okay? Are we not entitled to it? We are entitled to it. The Catholic Church is one of the biggest, richest spiritual institutions in the world. Where did the wealth come from? Came from us. We are entitled to that wealth. Okay? Just imagine that 12.6 million Africans ended up on the plantations and so on as beasts of burden and worked for hundreds of years without pay. Compute that. The resources for the development of the capitalist countries was accumulated through the transatlantic slave trade. And that is why I reject these calls on Africa and Latin America and so on, the Caribbean, that if we want to develop, we should be like Germany. If we want to develop, we should be like Britain and so on. That option is not available for us. They develop because they capture slaves to work for them for free. Who are you going to capture as slaves to come and work for you for free? They develop because under the colonial arrangement, they stole everything that we have. Which country are you going to colonize so that you can steal their things and so on? So that option is not available to us.
So what's our option as Africans?
Our option is collective self-reliance. Collective self-reliance and ending the hemorrhaging which has been taking place since the transatlantic slave trade. That's our option. We have no other option. We cannot use the Western path to development because it's not available to us.
So Africa unite.
Africa unite, protect your resources, and link up with the diaspora. But we have demonstrated this in recent history. Achampong, Operation Feed Yourself an Industry. Look at the monumental achievements we scored in those days. That's a demonstration of what collective self-reliance can do.
Do you remember his entry into the political scene?
I do.
Where were you then?
I was a kid, 1972 January, I was a kid. I think I was in school, if I'm not mistaken.
January, yeah.
School, you know. And we jubilated. Oh, we jubilated. You know, it was a great day. 13 January 1972 was a great day. You know, I mean, and we knew that it was going to lead to great things. And actually the beginning was very good. It was very, very good up until 1976 or 77. Why? We had achieved self-sufficiency in food production. We had started restoring Ghana's industrial capacity and so on. So many things were happening.
Your father was happy?
I don't know. I don't know. He may have been happy.
But you were happy, definitely.
Well, most Nkrumahs were very happy.
Yeah.
You know, Nkrumahs who were in detention were released and so on. That was just a general feeling of euphoria.
And in that same year, in that same year,
Nkrumah died.
He died.
Yes.
Do you remember where you were or how you heard that news?
I don't remember the details, but I was around, and I think all of us felt that it was a big blow. Even as children, we felt that it was a big blow, especially because it had been reported or rumored that a Champon's crew was meant to bring Nkrumah back. There had been a tussle between Ghana and Guinea over the body of Nkrumah. You know, Secretary did not want to release Nkrumah's body for burial in Ghana.
Why not?
Well, because he thought that Ghana had disrespected Nkrumah and so on. So he had a set of conditions under which Nkrumah's body would be brought. So there was some haggling.
Oh, really?
So,
He had conditions?
Yeah, he had conditions.
What were the conditions?
Well, the restoration of the CPP to power, you know, and so on. He had tough conditions, okay. So eventually took the diplomatic effort of people like Kojo Botsio and others to get Secretary to agree to release Nkrumah's body for burial in Ghana. Mind you, when Nkrumah died, something very significant happened. Nkrumah's coffin was carried only by heads of state. It has never happened anywhere in the world. Those who carried Nkrumah's coffin included Secretary, Fidel
Castro.
Fidel Castro carried Nkrumah's coffin, America Cabral and others. You know.
This is the first burial?
Yeah, the first burial in
Guinea.
In Guinea.
All heads of states, the pallbearers?
Only heads of states. You know, I mean, that was the rank. You know, Fidel was carrying Nkrumah's casket.
Wow.
They
had a personal relationship?
Of course. I mean, Nkrumah met Fidel in 1959.
2 years after we were independent?
Yeah.
Yes.
He met him in Hotel Teresa. I'm sure you know the story. I mean, Fidel had gone to address the UN General Assembly, and no hotel was ready to give him accommodation. So he ended up in Harlem, in a hotel called Hotel Teresa. And Nkrumah was the first head of state to actually go into Harlem, Hotel Teresa, to meet with Fidel, and that's when the relationship began between Nkrumah and Fidel. They were exceedingly good friends, you know.
So he was part of the pallbearers for the funeral in Guinea?
Yes, Fidel carried Nkrumah's coffin.
And then the body was finally brought to Ghana?
Yes.
And you remember those, because they were buried in Nkroful?
Buried in Nkroful. One of the things that I remember was that the body had been embalmed to last several years, like Mao Zedong's body.
Yeah, China.
And so on. But we were reckless. We buried him in a grave which was not properly sealed, and we allowed water to seep into the grave and destroyed the body.
This is in Nkroful?
In Nkroful. And that's why we moved, the body was moved to Accra and buried at the Kwame Nkrumah Mausoleum. It's sealed completely. Initially, it was not meant to be sealed. It was meant to be in a casket that people could see him, feely, you know, and so on. But we destroyed it, you know.
The 70s, Champon started well, came down, and then 79, a young flight lieutenant burst onto the scene. What are your memories of that time?
As a matter of fact, when June 4th occurred in 1979, I was not in Ghana. I was then in Philadelphia, you know, and I heard.
What was happening there? What took you there?
Well, I was on a study tour of the U.S.
Okay. As a journalist?
No, as a PR practitioner then.
Okay.
As a PR practitioner
All
then,
right.
you know.
Was that your first time in the USA?
I think so.
Did you get culture shock?
No, I didn't.
You didn't?
You know, I probably know more states in the United States than most Americans. You know, I've been to a lot of the states. You know, so I was in Philadelphia when the coup occurred, and when I first heard of the coup, I was shocked. Shocked because I had known Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings.
You had known him before?
Known him because he used to be around some friends of mine.
Okay.
You know, and so on. So I'd known him. And I'd never thought of him as a political person. You know, those were the days when he used to ride a motorcycle with Hell's Angels written at the back and so on. You
Really?
know. So I'd never thought of him as a political person. And when I heard that he had taken over, I was shocked. You know, I actually felt that something was dramatically wrong. You know. My host in the US then decided that I shouldn't come back to Ghana because Ghana was not safe and so on. But I decided to arrive, to come back to Ghana. Came back to Ghana on about the 9th of June and so on. And I used to host a very popular program on GBC with Emilia Krumwell-Adama. We used to do a program called In Town.
In town?
In Town.
What were the contents of the program?
Oh, just happenings around the town.
What's happening?
It's a magazine program,
Okay.
more or less what was happening.
Live or kind of pre-recorded?
Live.
Okay.
So on the first Saturday after my arrival, I was interviewed by Emilia Krumwell-Adama. And you know, Emilia was big. Emilia Krumwell-Adama was big. She interviewed me on the coup d'etat, on the revolution as it was then called. And I remember saying that there had been no revolution. I remember saying that what was happening was anarchical and that it was going to take Ghana nowhere and so on. This was, I think, June 11th, I think. And the panic, I mean, those days.
At GBC?
In the country, there's total panic. Who is this young man sitting on television condemning the revolution a few days after it had started, after a champion had been executed, and so on? Who is this guy? You understand? That was the general feeling. So it was after this interview that I established a link with Major Boachija. Okay, I was first contacted by Jana Pinting, well-known journalist and so on, who said that Major Boachija wanted to talk to me and that the whole of the Armed Forces Revolutionary Council listened to that interview. You know, that they were in a meeting in Burma camp or so, and all of them listened to that interview. So eventually I got on to Boachija, and Boachija told me that he agreed with me.
Although he was part of
this
the
was the spokesperson of the Armed Forces Revolutionary Council. He told me that he agreed with me, that he's an Nkrumahist, he's a Pan-Africanist, and so on, but that I should be careful. I shouldn't go around opening my mouth, talking by heart, and so on. And that anything could have happened to me, and that he had to restrain his colleagues and so on. Whether it was true or not, I don't know. But this is what Major Boachija, told me. So that was my first encounter with the revolution, so-called revolution and so on. And it continued, continued.
And you maintain your views that it wasn't a revolution till today?
Well, eventually the AFRC got split into two, with one faction claiming to be progressive Nkrumahist and so on. So we worked with that faction as against the other faction, which was led by Jerry John Rawlings and so on. But so many things have happened, since then. So many things have happened since then. One of the problems that I had with this so-called continuing revolution from 1979 into the 80s and so on was around 1982-83, when the government adopted first the Economic Recovery Program and the Structural Adjustment Program. And the consequences have been dire. In 1983, 300,000 workers lost their jobs. 300,000 workers lost their jobs as a result of our embrace of the IMF and the World Bank. By 1987, thereabout, the city had been devalued by more than 23,000%. We privatized state enterprise. We actually set up the Diversion Implementation Committee to privatize state enterprises and so many things. And I could not support these measures, And that is why for a long time, it did appear, well, it was, that I was in opposition against the PNDC, and suffered for it,
Personally, when was the first time you were picked up?
82. 82.
In the morning, in the evening?
In the night, actually.
Where were you?
82. I was picked up in Burma camp. Long story. Picked up in Burma camp. Apparently, I had fallen into the hands of somebody who was working with the PNDC very closely, but who was later on identified to be one of the key agents of the Central Intelligence Agency of the USA. You remember the spy swap?
Susudis?
No. The chief of staff.
Chief of staff.
Actually, then the military chief of staff actually then was found. I think he was in the Navy at the time. Was found to be working for the Central Intelligence Agency, and I happened to have fallen into his hands, and many things happened.
So they picked you up. Were you scared?
No, I've never really been scared about these arrests and so on, I got to know at one stage that there had been an instruction to kill me. I got to know at one stage that there had been an instruction to kill me. And to be honest with you, I owe my life to a very, very special friend, an officer, who has retired as a general. It was General Reparations Addo, who came to the guard room where I was being kept, and he instructed the guards that nobody was allowed to take me out of the guard room without his permission or the permission of Flight Lieutenant Rawlings. And that if I was taken out of the guard room and anything happened to me, he would hold the guards personally responsible for what happened to me. And that's what saved me. So my life was actually saved by General Reparations Addo. And I've forever been grateful to him for saving my life.
What's it like being inside a guard room?
It's horrible. It's not like the normal prison. I mean, in the guard room, the food is good.
The food is good?
Yeah, we eat the same food the soldiers eat.
Okay.
So the food is good, So there's no problem about food. But we have problems with the sanitary conditions because we're too many for the guard room. The guard room was choked, filled.
How many people in the guard room? And what's the size of this guard room?
Guard room is about the size of this studio. Maybe 2 separate rooms, about the size of this studio. And at one stage, I guess we would have numbered more than 50, maybe about 60 in that small space.
Wow. Standing room only?
I could sleep. I was in the same cell with Nana Akufo Addo, who was the chairman of the PNP, And to tell you about the conditions there, the psychological conditions. Akufo Addo was in the cell with us, and they brought his son. They caught his son and brought his son to the same cell.
With the father?
With the father. And the instruction was that they should never speak to each other. And that if they caught them speaking to each other, they'll be punished. So you have a father and son in the same cell who could not speak to each other. This is torture. This is plain torture. But they endured it. At one stage, I was in the same cell with Naval Lieutenant Dennis. And he really suffered. I've never seen anybody who can endure so much pain. In the night, they will come for Naval Lieutenant Dennis. Was he captain or lieutenant? I don't know. But he was in the Navy. take him out throughout the night and bring him at dawn. And by the time they brought him at dawn, he would be like a vegetable. He couldn't talk, he couldn't walk, and you see sand on his body. So obviously he was taken to the beach and tortured, and it happened many times, So this chap will come to the guard room, be lying there 48 hours or so, and then he'll start to move his body. And then he'll start exercising, I think he must have been a very strong person. And then in 3 days or so, he'll start walking, And then they'll come for him again and repeat the same thing over and
Back
over
to
and
zero.
over again, And he was an extraordinary soldier. I mean, his courage, his ability to take pain and so on was so extraordinary and so inspiring,
Well, how many times did you get picked up in those times, in the 80s?
The last time we sat down and counted, I'd been to prison 18 times.
18.
Yeah, 18 times. The last time we actually counted, I'd been to prison 18 times.
What are the various prisons?
Well, I've been in the guard room in what was known as Gonda Barracks, I think twice.
Mm-hmm.
I've been detained at the police headquarters a couple of times. Been detained at the Bureau of National Investigation cells a couple of times. I've been detained at the Osherford prison. I've been detained at the Akuse prisons. I've been detained at the Navrongo prison, Tamale prison, and several police cells, Accra Central Police Cell, and so on and so on.
What was the longest time that you'd been put in behind bars?
6 months.
6 full months?
Yeah, 6 months. 6 months. This was the period when I was first arrested, taken to Akuse prison, and then moved from Akuse prison to Tamale prison, and eventually to Navrongo prison. One arrest.
Did they ever tell you why they were arresting you?
No.
So you were there for 6 months and then one day...
There was one time I was told about why I had been arrested, and I was actually interrogated, but that was once.
Okay.
This was in, I suspect, 1992 or 93. I've been arrested with Professor Dubuahini.
Mm-hmm.
And we were charged with obstruction of justice. Okay, obstruction of justice. It happened, remember there was a bomb attack on the airport, not a bomb, I mean a dynamite attack on the Kotoka International Airport by a group called Farigan. Okay. Now this group was led by an Alhaji Damba, and they had come from outside to carry out this operation, and they came to see us. Of course, I told them I was not interested. Edu Buahini apparently told them he was not interested, and so on. But during the investigations into these explosions, Edu Buahini and I were picked up. And we were charged with the obstruction of justice and tried at the National Public Tribunal. So I actually went through interrogation. There was a proper charge sheet and so on. I think that was about the only time that I had been told why I had been arrested.
Were you defended by a lawyer?
Interestingly, President Kufuor offered to defend me, to be my lawyer in the trial.
Okay.
You know.
Did you accept?
Well, if you see the photographs of the trial, you will see President Kufuor sitting behind me, and he wanted to be my lawyer, but I refused. Because I insisted that the trial was political, had nothing to do with the law. It was a political trial, and I thought that nobody could articulate the politics of the moment better than I could do. So I did not accept him as my lawyer, but he still helped me. He actually took my notes.
Okay.
Okay. So you see him sitting behind me in the tribunal, taking notes and so on, and he took my notes, and it was very helpful.
And you defended yourself, in essence?
Yes, I defended myself. But I knew the trial was not going anywhere.
And you were right?
I was absolutely right. Because you see, to be tried in a court, they have to read your caution statement. Okay. And I know what I put in the caution statement. And I knew that that caution statement could not be read anywhere.
What did you put in the caution statement?
A lot. My caution statement was almost a book. And I put everything in it.
That was your strategy?
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when I was writing the statement, and 1 hour had passed, I was still,
you were still writing
and so on. And Professor Dubois was sitting by me, and then he looked at me and said, "What are you writing? Why are you writing so many things? You're going to implicate all of us." And I said, "Prof, just relax. I know what I'm doing. Nobody can read this statement in any court, anywhere in the world." And I suspect that was one of the reasons why the trial did not go far.
What was the most horrible of the prisons that you were locked up in?
Oh, most of the prisons were very horrible.
Very horrible, huh?
But perhaps the most horrible was Nkrumah. Nkrumah, I was kept in the remand cell for a couple of weeks. Okay.
That's in the police station side of things?
Yeah. The remand cell. It was a mud house.
A mud house?
Mud house. But there were so many of us in remand at the time, and I was wondering why they put me in remand, that we all could not sleep at the same time. We had to run a shift.
Shift sleeping?
Half of us would stand and half of us would sleep for a number of hours, and then we change over.
You wake the person up and say, get up.
It's time. Because there wasn't sleeping
space. There's no space. You have to manage.
So that was really horrible. And then there was a shortage of water and so on. So Nkrumah perhaps was the worst prison. But all of them were bad. I mean, I remember the first day we went to Osherford. Osherford, it was myself, Akoto Ampao, Raf Kume, and Kwekubaku. Okay. We were taken there in the night, I think around midnight or so.
They always come for you at night, right?
Not always. I've been arrested during the days.
Broad daylight, you've been arrested
but most of the time
at night, okay.
Midnight, So in the morning we're opened and we get into the yard. Wow. This is television, so. But the place for easing yourself and taking your bath is just right there.
Osherford.
You take your bath in the open. Everybody sees you and so on, And they still had this, dugouts.
Yes.
That's where you ease yourself.
Wow.
And there were worms, not worms, maggots all over the place, And there was a sign there. The use of disinfectants is strictly prohibited. That should give you an idea.
Exactly. Strictly prohibited.
Use of disinfectants is strictly prohibited in a place infested with maggots.
So this message was for the warders? That
for everybody. And then I was trying to find out why, and I was told that it was because they feared that people could use them to commit suicide.
You drink it instead of disinfecting.
So it was a very horrible experience. One of my most horrible experiences was also, I think, in the Kwesi prison, where they serve the food in chamber pots.
No!
Yeah.
No!
Yeah, food was served in chamber pots.
No!
Yeah.
What was the food?
Yeah?
What was the food?
Oh, the food...
What's prison food like?
Okay. There is what they call the manpower and zontoli. That was standard. Okay.
What are the ingredients?
I think the manpower was the soup. I think so.
Okay.
Okay. And this is soup. If you looked at the soup, you could see the few ingredients at the bottom. You could see them, actually see them. It was transparent. Okay.
Transparent soup.
Yeah, transparent. You could see a few ingredients at the bottom. Just water, basically. And the zontoli was supposed to be banku, but it was hard as wood. Okay, so this was the food. And of course,
what?
I didn't have to eat it because we got help from even some of the warders were so kind. They gave us food. A lot of the time, food came from outside the prison. In fact, in the Nkrumah prison, I had a little money, that had come from friends and so on. Even some of the cadets of the revolution
will come and visit you.
came and visited. Those who had fallen out with
Yes.
the government and so on, they all came. And so on. So I would give out money to buy a whole pig.
A whole pig.
Whole pig. And then the prisoners who went out to do hard labor, would buy the pig and bring, and then we'll cook it for everybody in the prison, So that's how we overcame some of our problems. In the Tamale prison, we had the most senior person in charge. Was very sympathetic. In fact, the first night when we arrived in the prison, he told us that he was not a fool, and that he had to face reality, and that Nkrumah came from prison and became head of state,
Yes.
and so on. And that we should not be worried, and that prison is a place for nurturing leaders, and so on. So he knew that one day we'll be leaders. So he was not going to subject us to torture and all that.
This is the warder?
This is the head of the prison.
Prison, okay.
I mean, he had a conversation with us and actually instructed that they should cook our meals separately. I was there with Akufo Addo.
Okay. So political prisoners had different conditions
In that prison,
in that
not in all
prison.
prisons.
In that prison.
In some prison, you were in trouble, But in that prison, this prison head, I think he was watching his back, protecting his future.
Exactly
And
so.
on.
Yeah. But in other prisons, you would mix with the common criminals as well?
Yeah.
Murderers, rapists, whoever.
Well, the first day I was taken to the Nsawam prisons, I was put in the same cell with a South Korean who had just been convicted for murder.
He told you himself, or you heard it from
The officers told me before they put me in the cell.
They said your cellmate is a murderer.
Yeah. Now this is the South Korean who had just been convicted of murder. And we are going to sleep with him.
Did you sleep that night, the first night?
I slept. What would I do? I slept.
But in person, was he a nice person? Did you have
Well, he
conversations?
taught me a few things. He taught me how to make beer. He taught me how to make beer with condo. He taught me many things.
You made the beer in the prison?
Yeah, we used to brew beer in the prison. You manage to get condo. And prison is interesting. But you get your condo,
Yeah.
and you mix the condo with yeast.
Yes.
Okay. And then you tie it in a white cloth and put it away.
For it to ferment?
Well,
Yeah.
I think so.
Uh-huh.
And then, dependent on how much alcohol you want in it, I mean, after a week or two, you mix it with water. And it's beer.
It had a kick. It could get you drunk?
More than drunk. I mean, that's beer, pure beer. And this kale was introduced to us by this South Korean
person.
There are some things I don't want to talk about.
So you left and he was still there? Did he ever leave the prison? Did they come?
I think under some arrangement with the South Korean government, he eventually left.
He left. Okay.
But he taught us how to make beer and so many things. I mean, he used to go out, to work, and this guy would kill a python. Yeah,
The South Korean guy?
Yeah, he would kill a python and bring it into the yard. That's how he was supplementing his nutritional intake. And so
Did you enjoy some of the python with him?
I said there are some things that I don't want to talk about, my friend.
I can imagine you having some grilled python or I don't know.
But look, let me. The python is interesting.
Okay.
It's a mix between chicken and fish. It's very interesting, the
Combo.
texture.
Chicken and fish.
A mix between chicken and fish. And if you're in prison, it's useful, especially for those who are not getting visitors and so on, because you will die. Malnutrition will kill you. So a lot of the prisoners depended on this South Korean who was occasionally killing pythons and bringing them. There must have been a lot of pythons around the
I can imagine. So supplementing your diet.
But then I remember I was in the Nsawam prison with Kwesi Pratt
Okay.
who became Secretary General of the Ghana TUC.
Yes.
So one morning I had python on the plate, and I entered his cell. He said, "What is that?" I said, "Python." He said, "Get out of my cell."
Did he keep the head? The South Korean man. I mean, I must imagine that, like with the cats, the head is the prized part of the.
I don't know. I don't know.
You just get the body.
I don't know. You know.
Were you tortured?
Yes, on a few occasions. On a few occasions, yes, I suffered what amounted to torture. Okay. There was one time I'd been arrested in Accra. I was being taken to one of the prisons outside Accra. And the guys who arrested me just kept driving me around for hours, you know. So eventually we ended up on the motorway. As we were driving on the motorway towards, you know, the eastern side, I mean, towards Ho and so on the motorway, the leader of this group actually said to my hearing that they should look for the ideal place to finish me off. That's torture.
Yeah, of course. 100%.
Yeah, that's,
you're in a moving car, you can't move.
Yeah, and says they should look for the ideal place so they can finish me off, and that I'm causing too much trouble. This prison thing is not.
It's not working.
It's not taming me, so they should finish me off. You know, I was sitting in the car, looking at this moron, you know, and it passed. I would count that as torture.
Yeah, definitely.
There was another time I was being interrogated at the Greater Accra headquarters of the Bureau of National Investigations. And
Near immigration?
no, just here.
Oh, okay.
37 Military
okay.
Hospital, you know. And as a matter of fact, the people who were interrogating were people I had known, you know. One of them was my wife's classmate and so on, you know. And they put me on a broken chair. Why? It must have been deliberate. I was on a broken chair for hours during interrogation, just to make me uncomfortable.
So it's not steady.
It's not steady.
Yeah, so you need to be
know,
balancing.
You're balancing and so on. They will not allow you to stand and so on. I thought that was torture. You know, that was torture. And then there was some standard practice. You're arrested. You're taken into a room. And as you're sitting down, you know, the agents, the security agents, the BNI operatives and so on, they come into the room and they engage in conversations with themselves. But you're left to no doubt that it's your history that they have reduced to conversations to themselves. And it can be very, very terrible.
So they're talking about you but not ignoring you.
Yes, you know, they appear to be engaged in conversation among themselves, but they're breaking you down.
Yeah.
Using, you know,
your story.
Using what they know of your history and twisting it and so on, you know, in order to psychologically damage you.
Yeah.
And this happened usually before interrogations. You know. So
what? Yeah.
Oh, Charlie, horrible things.
Yeah, what's an interrogation like? I mean, is there light on, in the movies you see, maybe they put a light on you or,
no,
or they blast music?
I didn't
None of that?
experience any of those light experiences and so on, you know. But, you know, they're sitting there, say, you know, and then they make a remark, and you know the remark is definitely about you. And they're saying things about your family, what they do and what they don't do, some of it not true and so on, but just to wear you down.
Yeah, makes sense.
I mean, yeah, that's psychological torture.
Yeah.
You know, plain and simple, it's psychological torture.
How did you bear it? How did you go through it?
Oh, you block your mind. You block your mind. You know, you block your mind. You know, I mean, I learned so many things in prison. One of the things that I learned in prison that I'm so happy that I learned, and I learned it from an American who had been arrested for espionage. And he taught me how to read fast. You know, there are various methods of reading. Normally when we read, you read every word. You can actually learn to read by skipping some of the words, reading just the key words. So for a whole paragraph of about 50 words, you can read maybe 10 words after the 50 words and get the meaning of the paragraph.
The gist.
And I was so happy that I learned the skill. You know.
Where have you used it, applied it?
Oh, on many occasions. On many occasions. I mean, many occasions. So I tend to read very fast. Some of it, if you use it, you don't get the full import of what you are reading, but you get an idea of what you are reading, and it's still very useful.
Yes.
You know, there will be many situations where you have to read fast, you know, especially in conferences and so on.
Exactly.
You go to a conference and there's a huge document which is being discussed, you get it at the last minute and so on. Those methods help a lot, you know, and I'm happy to have learned that in prison.
Was there a time where you felt truly alone when you were?
Oh, there was a time when I cried. I mean, I don't normally cry, but there was a time when I cried. This was in the Nkrumah prison in 1986. And a friend of mine had come from Accra to see me, lawyer Yao Opoku. You know, he had come to see me. I was in the prison. And he told me that my twin boys had been born. They had been born and I was in prison. I couldn't go home and so on. And I broke down and cried. I don't normally cry.
No.
But that day, I don't know what happened. I broke down and I cried. I cried like a baby. You know, I really cried. You know.
Were you allowed to get home visits? Could your family come to visit you?
In some of the prisons, I allowed one visit a week. In some, for example, I was allowed one visit a week.
And how long should that visit last?
Oh, about an hour. In any case, what is there to talk about? You are in a cage and the person is standing outside and so on.
Oh, you don't even get to touch the person?
In some of the prisons, we are virtually in a cage. You know.
Wow.
In a few of the prisons, you will sit in the head of the prison's office, and there must be a prison officer there recording everything you say.
Oh no! So listening to everything.
Listening to everything and so. So it depends, you know. But in some prison, for example, when I first got there, there was a cage. You know, eventually, they allowed me to meet my visitors in an officer's office. But then there's somebody there recording. You know.
Could you get letters? Could you write letters? Could you receive letters?
If you got letters, I think it was allowed, but it had to go through the prison authorities. They read it.
Oh.
And if you wrote letters outside, it went through the prison authorities and they read it. But we found ways of smuggling letters who didn't go through the prison officers.
Okay.
But I won't tell you how. It may be necessary at some time in the future.
When was the last time you visited the Ghanaian prison system as a guest of the state, as a detainee? When was your last trip?
This must have been in 1993, I think.
Okay.
1993. No, before then. Because I'm told, you know, I didn't know, but I'm told by some people who were in the PNDC then, ministers and so on, that at one stage, a decision was taken that no matter what I did, nobody should arrest me because it was making me, in their words, popular.
Yeah.
And I was getting a lot of attention in the international media and so on. I was in the international media all the time. You know? So they thought that it should stop. And this happened because I had come from the UK, I had come from London, you know, and I was arrested on arrival at the Kutuka International Airport.
As soon as you touched down?
Yeah, I was arrested on the tarmac. You
know. You didn't even get into the formalities of immigration?
I was arrested on the tarmac, and then I was taken to the BNI office in the airport. You know, and a lot of things happened, you know. But then within 2 hours of my arrest, the whole world was on fire, and I mean it, you know. They were getting, those days, fax messages from members of parliament in the UK, from senators in the US, from France, from Germany. The whole world was on them. In fact, I'm told that the fax machine at the castle broke down. You know.
Fax system coming through.
They were coming. I mean, one of those who had actually sent a fax message demanding my immediate release was the Lord Eric Avery, who was a member of the House of Lords in the UK. You know, I think I was about the first person to send, you know. So, you know, I was released. I was released the same day.
The day that they arrested you on the tarmac?
I was released from the airport. I was in detention for only about 3 hours. So when I was released, the BNI officer asked me, what is happening? You know, they couldn't understand what was happening. I mean, but it was a trick. We had used a trick, The night before I came to Ghana, I addressed a press conference in London. And at the press conference, I told the British media that I was going back to Ghana and I'll be arrested at the airport. And they said, how do I know? I said, well, it's the nature of the regime and so on. So the British press was actually on standby.
In Kotoka?
Something happened, Our Excellency. The British, everybody, I put the world on notice that I was coming to Ghana, I'll be arrested, and that it was even possible that I'll be killed, So this alarm bell had been rung. And then in those days, how the airport was configured, something could happen and nobody would know. So we decided that a number of people should be at the airport and positioned in certain places so that if I got out of the plane, they would see me. So there's a guy called Azuma Besori, very good comrade of mine. So he was positioned at the airport and he saw my arrest. And he had a telephone number in London to call as soon as I was arrested. So as soon as I was arrested, he called the number. And that triggered all of these reactions, And in fact, the number belonged to Napoleon Abdullahi, who became Ghana's ambassador to Mali and Cuba. I think it was his number which was used to trigger that operation, So after a few hours of detention in the airport, I was released because they couldn't stand the pressure. The pressure was just too
massive.
Much,
I'm curious, did you ever meet Flight Lieutenant General Rawlings face to face after all your trials?
I did. That was in 2001, January 2001. He insisted on seeing me.
Is this before the handover or after?
I'm not sure, but January
2001.
I think after the handover.
Okay.
But he insisted on seeing me. I refused to see him the first time. He had actually come to a friend of mine, Ralph Kesley-Hayford, He had asked Ralph Kesley-Hayford to ensure that, to try and get me to see him and so on. So eventually I got to meet him. And we spoke for 4.5 hours. Just the three of us spoke for 4.5 hours. It was in that meeting that he told me that he was not responsible for my arrest and detention. He actually told me that some of my friends were the people who were pushing that I should be arrested and detained, and that as a leader, he couldn't say no to them and so on. I tried to find out the truth, and the truth is much different. But we spoke for 4.5 hours, and it led to a lot of sensation. I mean, President Akufo and others could not understand why, after all the struggle, I ended up in a meeting with Rawlings. But hey, what was I to do?
Because in '95, you were part of Alliance for Change. And
yes, I was part of the Alliance.
The Kume Preko demonstrations against the VAT.
Yeah.
How did the planning of that, because that's such a big moment in Ghana's history.
No, to be honest with you, I mean, people claim all kinds of things. The truth is that it was Nana Akufo Addo's birthday. And there was a party for him at the residence of J. Blankson. I wasn't at the party. So it was at the party that the idea of this demonstration came up. They discussed it. Reku Brobe was there. All kinds of people were there. So after the party, I was called by Ferdinand Ayim, who told me that this meeting had taken place and that there was an idea floating around for the organization of a demonstration, that I had been mentioned as a possible organizer. So I wasn't at the original meeting which took the decision in A.J. Blankson's house. But immediately after the meeting, Ferdinand Ayim told me about it, and I got to meet Nana Akufo Addo, Nyahota Makro, and others, and we started work,
How do you organize a demonstration of that magnitude? What do you do?
Oh, that was a lot of work. Kafui, it was a lot of work. I mean, we worked so hard. Look, for the first demonstration that took place in Accra, there was no community in Accra that we didn't go. We virtually touched everybody, spoke to everybody, went to all the different constituencies, to the ward level, speaking, explaining why it was necessary for this demonstration to take place. And that took us about 2 to 3 weeks
Basically, was that the VAT was too high and they had to get rid of it. Is that correct?
No, I mean, that demonstration was not just about VAT. It was about everything. Everything. I mean, today I know some people in the NPP who say that it was just about VAT and so on. It wasn't true. It was about everything. It was about detentions. It was about the economic conditions in the country. VAT was only the trigger. You understand? So we got to work. And again, to tell you the truth, none of us knew that the demonstration was going to be that big. None of us knew that the demonstration was going to be that big. I remember that morning, we had agreed to gather at the residence of Nana Akufo Addo, opposite the Lima police station.
Yes.
So we were there. And we had planned the demonstration to start at a certain time. Way before that time, somebody came in and told us that, look, the crowd at the Kwame Nkrumah Circle was unbelievable.
Massive.
And that if there was no leadership, it could degenerate. You know. So immediately we wanted a few people to go there and ascertain, find out what the situation was. And I volunteered to go. I think there were 2 or 3 of us. You know, I was obviously the leader of the team. And Massa.
When you got there and you saw the people, what was going through your heart?
By the time I got to busy internet, you know, around Apollo Theatre, I could only see a sea of people. So I couldn't get to the Kwame Nkrumah Circle. I mean, if I got to the Kwame Nkrumah Circle, I don't know what would have happened, you know. But just a sea of people, hundreds of people, thousands of people, you know. The roads were impassable, blocked. So I then decided to return. So I returned to Nana Akufo Addo's house and told him that, look, we have to move immediately. All of us had to move immediately. Otherwise, something could happen in our name.
Why did you call the demonstration Kume Preko?
It was part of the hype. Part of the things that mobilized people. I mean, it was a hype.
Kill me now.
Yeah, desperation and so on, you know. So we got there and fortunately the security arrangement we had made, you know, worked. Otherwise, there would have been chaos. You know, we had made a simple security arrangement. For us, and I think still is valid, for every demonstration, the front and the back are most important. If anything would happen, it would happen in the front of the demonstration or at the back of the demonstration. The back is even more complicated because you could get agents provocateurs, people who are not part of the demonstration, causing mayhem at the back. And if you don't have an eye at the back, they will do things in your name and spoil things and so on. So we had a security system which focused on the front and the back. I was in charge of the front, and Akufo Addo was in charge of the rear. Okay. In the front, we had built a circle. Should I be saying all these things? In the front, we had built a circle. So the most prominent leaders were in the circle. Akufo Addo, Nyahota Makro, Preko, Victor Newman, and so on, were in that circle. They had been completely encircled. They couldn't get out of the circle. So they were in the circle, and in front of that circle, there was a line of strong activists, carefully selected.
For what? What are the criteria for selection?
You know, I say strong.
Brawn.
Yeah, strong activists. You know. So I think there were 2 lines in front of them. So to get to them, you had to break between the first 2 lines
to get to the circle.
Break through the circle
To get to
them.
Okay, so the circle was like a surrounded. You have people surrounding.
Circle.
Okay.
Human beings
surrounding your core people.
You know.
Okay.
And I was in front of the lines.
2 lines.
And so on. And Akufo Addo was at the back.
Similar arrangement at the back with the circle?
No, the
or
back
lines?
didn't have a circle. The back had lines.
Okay.
Lines of strong people and so on, you know. And it worked. How we managed to do it, because I talking about 100 to 120,000 people.
It's a lot of people that day.
And we managed to arrange this, you know. Of course, you know about the shooting and the death of Ahuno Honga and so on. Something very significant happened, you know, around Adabraka. a police van. There's a police officer, he was Dr. something, what is his name? Police officer called Dr. something, I'm sure you remember his name. He nearly became IGP. So, so by the time we got there, we had all kinds of strategies for moving. By the time we got there, this police officer walked up to me and said, look, something was happening in the front, and that they needed me to talk to them, otherwise there would be a catastrophe. Something very terrible would happen. Okay. So I called somebody to take charge of the front and joined the police car to rush to the front to go and solve that problem. By the time we got there, the shooting had occurred. You understand? Otherwise, I've been in the range of fire.
Yeah. And Hunger died.
Ahunu Hunger died. Many others died. A few others died. And some were injured in horrific ways. Somebody had his eye removed and so on. But that's history.
The reaction of the government to what happened, I mean, anything surprise you about how the government reacted to Kume Preko?
No, I thought that they protected the criminals, those who had done the killing. There was no proper investigation. Nobody was held accountable, and so on. And for me, that was a problem. I mean, if you open fire on demonstrators and kill them, you have to be held accountable. You understand? And I know that the killing was not done by the security services. It wasn't done by the police. It was done by plainclothes activists. The Tonton Makuts of the regime did the killing.
To make the demonstration look bad?
No, not to make the demonstration look bad. I mean, everybody knew that the demonstrators were not responsible for killing themselves, but to frighten people so that there wouldn't be another demonstration. And indeed, after this demonstration, many of the leaders of the Alliance for Change wanted us to stop. They didn't want us to go any further.
Because the plan was to go to Kumasi as well?
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, but some of them were scared, But we decided to go to Kumasi. And a few of us, very few of us, decided that we'll go to Kumasi. And we told the leaders who were hesitating that if they didn't want to come to Kumasi, fine. We were going ahead to organize Kumasi. They should stay in Accra. We will organize Kumasi. And we moved to Kumasi and started the organization. And then they realized that, look, they couldn't stay back. So they joined, And Kumasi was much bigger than Accra. Kumasi, you're talking about 500,000 or more people on the streets. Never happened in our history. Even the Accra demonstration was unprecedented. Never had anybody managed to put more than 100,000 people on the streets. But we did,
Would you say it was a success, Kume Preko? Even though some people lost their lives, I mean, the big picture, what you wanted to achieve.
Well, speaking now, and given the fact that some of us who were active in organizing this demonstration eventually found ourselves in government. One of us even became a president. The fact that they continued to implement the value-added tax and did some of the things that we were against, some of the things for which people demonstrated and died, it's difficult for me to call that a success. You understand?
I do.
Yeah, success, we put the largest crowds on the streets and so on. But we betrayed the objectives of the demonstration. And the Ahunu Hungers died in vain. That's my regret.
Inside newspaper, how did that come about?
It was at a time when we were finding it difficult to get our message across. First of all, even printing houses would not print messages which were anti-regime and hostile. And as for newspapers, the only newspapers that we were able to rely on then were the Ghanaian Voice, and then later came in the Chronicle and so on. There had been a few things with Free Press and so on, the Independent and all. But we felt that there was a need to have a clearly distinct left-wing mouthpiece, And so we set up the Insight in 1993, I think. 1993, yes, I think 1993. As a weekly newspaper. I was then working with the Ghanaian Voice, or writing for the Ghanaian Voice, which was the largest circulating newspaper in the country. We're doing more than 100,000 copies per issue, and so. Then I set up the Insight with nothing. Set up the Insight with credit facilities for printing for 2 weeks. And a gift of newsprint from Kofi Kumsin, who was then the editor of the Chronicle. So from nothing, from absolutely nothing. We printed on credit. The newsprint was free. I used the facilities of the Chronicle, I think for the first 2 issues, and eventually used the Independence facilities and so on. But then, since 1983, the Insight has been published. It's now a daily newspaper, and it's still alive.
What are some of your greatest achievements with the Insight? What are you most proud of?
Well, that we still exist is an achievement,
Have you ever been sued?
Few times, once, twice,
Who sued you?
Well, the immediate past government, the Ashanti Regional Minister sued us, and it's my friend, Simon Osei Mensah. So I went to him and told him that, look, go and withdraw your suit. We will apologize to you, we will retract the story, and so on, and you would look good, everything will be fine. I said, no, he wanted to go to court. It's okay, let's go to court. And he lost.
How much money did he want from you?
I've forgotten, but he lost.
What was the story?
Some story alleging that he had made some ethnic pronouncements somewhere, I knew that he had a bad case, but court litigation is too much. It wastes your time, your resources, and so on. So I wanted to cut it. So I said, look, we're going to apologize. Even though I think we are right, we are going to apologize. He said, no, he will go to court and so on. He spent a lot of time in court and lost. There was another lawsuit. It didn't go anywhere. They lost because we are very careful about what we do and so on. I think there was one person who won a case against us. One. I think it was Hakman Usuajimai. I've forgotten what the story was about, but he won his case against us. And he's my friend. He's been my friend for a long time, In the struggle for democracy, we used to work together all the time. In fact, most of the work was given to me and him to do, and I used to work from his house. And so I was wondering why he decided to go to court. But he went to court, and he didn't enforce the judgment, so we didn't have a case to go for, appeal and so on, and he just died. But I think we've had 3 suits altogether, about 3 suits.
Have you sued anybody before?
No.
Have you been tempted to sue anybody before?
Well, I've been urged to sue people, but it's not been an option that I've taken. I mean, for example, this guy who was behind the allegation that I collected a bribe of 126,000 and then later came to apologize and said he made it up.
Oh.
Everybody said I should take him to court. And I said, let him go. And the fact that he's come to confess, that he lied and that he did it because of some incentives or, because he had been instigated by the political authorities and so it was enough for me. There was no need to go to court, His confession was enough.
That's enough.
Yeah.
You are known for your rapid-fire analysis as well as historical references and the consistent ideological position on your radio panelists. When you appear as a radio panelist, can you remember the first time you were on a morning show as a radio?
Well, not a morning show. My first radio program was in 1969.
69?
Yeah, my first radio program was in 1969.
You were 16 then?
Yeah.
15, 16?
Yeah. I mean, I had acted as Colonel Gaddafi. There was a mock UN General Assembly session.
Okay.
And I played the role of Gaddafi. So after that, I was approached by Frank Autry, Uncle Frank, who was then hosting the Uncle Frank show on GBC. And he approached me to work with him. So the first assignment he gave me was actually to be reading poems.
Okay.
So I started reading poems on Uncle Frank's show in 1969.
What kind of poems? What kind of poems?
I think the first poem he gave me to read was a poem called The Diamond in the Rough.
Mm.
You know, and so on. And he usually selected the poems
and you just read them.
I read them.
Okay.
And then one thing moved on to the other. I ended up doing Leaders of Tomorrow with Dusty Wayne and so on. So many of them, you know. And then the highlight was when I went on the Mike Egan show. I did the Mike Egan show a couple of times, not once, many times.
You were on his show?
I was on the show.
What was that like?
A long time ago.
Yeah, but I mean, Mike Egan was an icon.
The Mike Egan show was
that was the top show,
shows,
definitely.
in the country. So I did Mike Egan show. Eventually, I became a regular interviewer on In Town.
Yes.
Around town. The program was around town. What's it called? In Town with Emilia Nkrumah Ladama and so on. So we did that, and then I hosted Talking Point.
Oh,
I hosted Talking Point.
I see. How long?
More like a stand-in.
Okay.
You know, but I did Talking Point a few times.
Was it exciting?
Oh, Talking Point was the biggest talk show in the country.
Definitely. On a Sunday evening, nobody missed that.
It was the biggest talk show in the country.
Yeah.
You know? So I did that. And then I did also a program called Leaders of Tomorrow. Yes, I think it was Leaders of Tomorrow was done on GBC radio. But I did another show, another youth program, which was then produced by John Gafachi on television. Builders of Tomorrow.
Builders of Tomorrow.
Builders of Tomorrow. It was produced by John Gafachi, you know, and so on. So this continued. But interestingly, there was a long break. Around 1976, on one of the programs on TV, I had launched a very serious attack on the Western countries, especially Germany, for their colonial past and so on. There's so much protest that I had to leave. So there was a small break, you know. There was a lot of protests. I had to leave. And then 1979, there was also a short break in my career. I had to leave, you know, because the authorities didn't like what I was saying and doing and so on. And then after 1982, there was a longer break, you know, before I finally came back. My newspaper career actually started in Ghanaian Times in 1974. But before then, I'd been writing for newspapers and so on.
Did you do any journalism in secondary school?
In secondary school, I was the deputy editor of the school magazine.
Okay. Which school did you go to?
Tema Secondary School.
Okay.
You know. So that's it. You know.
Okay. I mean, do you enjoy your current stints? I mean, you're known for your views, strong views, and your contributions.
There's nothing to enjoy. It's just work, you know. Just work all the time. And it's not enjoyment.
How'd you prepare for like a session on the radio or television?
There's no preparation. I mean, I came here without preparation. I didn't even know what you wanted to ask.
At all.
Yeah, so I couldn't have prepared. So I just walk in and honestly say what I think, mistakes and all, and walk away. That's all.
You must read a lot.
I don't know if I read more than others.
Okay, let me rephrase my question. I mean, what are you reading now?
Right now?
Yes.
I'm reading a book which has just been published by Tricontinental. It's a very fat book.
Okay.
It's about 400 pages or more, about 500 pages or more. And it's a documentation of the Tricontinental meeting in 1966. It's everything about the Tricontinental meeting in Cuba, Havana.
Okay.
Everything. The speeches which were made, the discussions which were held in the closed sessions, the final resolutions, everything.
The three continents being?
Tricontinental.
Yes.
That was a conference which was attended by African states, the Caribbean states, and Asian states.
Okay.
And it's interesting. I mean, I was given one of the first 2 copies which came out.
Nice.
By Vijay Prashad, who was the editor of the book in South Africa. And I'm reading it, and it's most fascinating. In fact, the most interesting thing is that the things which were discussed then in 1966 are the same things happening today.
Right now.
Is this 66 or 61? I'm not sure.
Same things are happening.
Yeah.
After 50 or so years.
Yeah.
Does that surprise you?
I was surprised when I started noticing that we are discussing things which were discussed in the 60s. Same things, no change. I was surprised.
Possibly then also means that the study of history is really important if you want to understand what is happening now.
Oh, as I told you from the very beginning, history is a science. History is a science which enables us to understand today and to make predictions for the future. And history is absolutely important in everything, in medicine, in agriculture, in politics, everything. History is key. History is just not a narration of events. It's a science. It's a science.
You're the founder of Pan-African TV. What's it like running this organization? What was the idea behind it?
It's hell. I mean...
Hell?
Well, first of all, I'm not... Well, I had the idea of getting involved in television and so on, but then there was a friend of mine who joined very early, in making sure that it happened, Alhaji Shiraz, and we worked together and tried to establish this with nothing.
Just like you established the Insight?
Yeah, with nothing, absolutely nothing. I mean, look, we didn't have a studio. We started our broadcast from the garden, they will tell you.
Nice. Garden?
From the garden in front of the...
How do you deal with the ambient sounds?
I don't know. But we started our broadcast from the garden. In fact, the first person we interviewed was Kwame Sifakai.
Okay.
And Kwame Sifakai came here, and there was no studio, So after looking around for the best place to interview him and so on, we settled on the reception, the little corner in the reception, and we interviewed Kwame Sifakai. Because we had gotten the license, and we needed to start operating before a certain deadline came. Otherwise, we're going to lose the license. So we started broadcasting. And then we decided to develop a studio on our own. I brought in a few experts. We couldn't pay the bill. It was too much. So we just got and bought student mattresses and pinned them on the walls and so on, and created a studio.
For soundproofing? For
soundproofing. Yeah. We created a studio, and then we started broadcasting from that makeshift studio. Today we have 2 studios. I would think modern studios, but that's hard work, hard work. We have 2 studios. We have the Kwame Nkrumah studio and a studio which has no name, but it's okay.
Is it intentional to have no name?
No, we haven't found a name yet, but one day we'll find a suitable name.
Who are your heroes? Kwame Nkrumah, yes. Who do you look up to intellectually? Who are the heroes of Kwesi Pratt Jnr?
Oh, there are so many of them. I mean, Fidel obviously is an extraordinary human being who influences so many people. So Fidel is great. Toussaint Louverture, the founder of the modern Republic of Haiti, is an inspiration, and so many others. I mean, somebody like Akufo Addo is a huge inspiration. His brain power is unequaled. I mean, I just wish that I had the brain power of people like Akufo Addo and Yao Graham and Akoto Ampao. Exceptional brain, So there are so many of them. Professor Atabrichum. I've been in the same study group with most of them,
What were you studying?
Everything. History, history, Marxism basically. And if you study Marxism, you study everything. You understand? It's the key to everything. There was a time when I was in the same study group with Professor Mainly the professors, Professor Nsasamwa, Professor Amatedu, Professor Tabrichun, Professor Osai of the Classics Department of the University of Cape Coast, and so on. All of us were in a study group. Yao Poku, Kafui Sanaya, and so on, you know. So we studied in the study groups. And for me, the study groups have been my university.
Are you still in study groups?
Yes.
Okay.
It's part of my life.
So how does it work?
How does
a study group work for somebody who is curious?
Well, you join one, and then...
Where do I find them? Are they on Facebook? I mean, how do I find a study group?
Normally, you have to get introduced, you know,
okay.
And then you get into the study group, you decide your line of study, and then you study, you teach yourselves, you know, you challenge yourselves, you know, and then it continues, you know.
We started out this conversation on the global level.
I'm just wondering, with all the interview you are doing, how you are going to find space to broadcast this?
Online, on YouTube.
Oh, okay.
Yes. This is long form, so no worries at all.
Okay.
We started from like the whole world, big issues, came to Africa. Let's come to Ghana now. Are you bothered when you hear some people feel that you are pro-NDC? Does that worry you?
That's their headache. It's not my headache. It's not my headache. I mean, look. Some of these communicators from NPP, they are simply lazy. They are extremely lazy and pedestrian. As soon as you disagree with them, you are NDC. What's this rubbish? You know, it comes with a certain assumption that they are the ultimate right. I mean, I don't mean right in terms of direction, right in terms of values.
Correct.
So,
Yeah,
correct. And that if you disagree with them, then you must belong to the ultimate devil, the NDC. The world doesn't work that way. You understand? What I have suffered fighting the PNDC and the NDC, none of them, including their leaders, has suffered even a percentage of what I've gone through. They have no right, no authority to be telling me how I think and how I behave. That's the bottom line. They have no right. They haven't earned the right to tell me how to behave. When they earn that right, maybe. But as of now, none of them has earned that right to tell me how to think and behave. You understand? Besides, what I do is in the public domain. People know what I say, what I do, and so on. It's not in a corner. So everybody knows that I'm critical of the government when it's necessary. I'm not going to criticize the government because some MPP guy wants me to criticize the government. To hell. Who are they? You understand? I criticize the government when I disagree with the government. In my own time, my own space. Nobody's going to dictate to me how I conduct myself. And I don't mind. Okay? I don't mind what labels people put on me. Because those labels don't stick. They can't stick.
What's the funniest one to you? I mean, or most amusing label that somebody tried to stick on you?
Oh, it was during the PNDC era, and this is very interesting. You know, I told you the story about when I went to London and I was arrested at the airport, and the Lord Eric Ebre and everybody kept sending in, you know, protests and so on. And then the PNDC guy said, "Oh, he must be a CIA agent." Because otherwise, how does he get access to the British Parliament?
Exactly.
How does he get access to the House of Lords and so on? There must be some force behind him. He must be a CIA agent. What am I supposed to do? Protest? No. Let them say it. You know.
Mahama 2.0, Mahama 1.0. Any differences? Second coming, first coming?
Well, you see, there are things that His Excellency John Dramani Mahama is doing now which are worthy of support. For example, currently he's the AU champion on reparations. He's leading the charge, the AU charge for reparations. And I think that this is something which deserves the support of every African, wherever they may be, not just Ghanaians, but every African. And he's doing so well. His level of articulation, it's quite interesting. Indeed, as we speak, on the 25th of March, he's tabling a resolution in the United Nations General Assembly making the transatlantic slave trade and classical colonialism worst crime in human history. Okay. For that, he has received the support of 55 African countries and the Caribbean nations in CARICOM and so on. This is a major step forward. Major, big step forward, which needs support, the support of all Africans wherever they may be. You understand? So you can accept that. I was also very highly impressed when he, in apparent defiance of Western pressure and so on, decided to make a huge donation to the Cuban people to overcome their current economic problems and so on. Ghana made a substantial donation to Cuba. Ghana also made a substantial donation to Jamaica, actually, where we actually send our soldiers from the Field Engineers Regiment to assist them with fighting the effects of the hurricane and so on. These are all positive things. These are all remarkable things. Again, it's important to see that within 1 year, a little over 1 year, we've managed to drop inflation from 57% to 3.3%. Never happened in our history. Okay? Never happened in our history. You look at the value of the cedi has appreciated a lot. From about 17 cedis to $1, we are now talking about exchanging the cedi at about 10 point something to $1 and so on. These are all significant improvements that we have to recognize. However, it's important also to note that the economic program which this Mahama government is implementing is the same economic program which the Akufo Addo government implemented.
Does that disappoint you?
I wouldn't call it disappointment. Okay. But it's the same economic program. It's the same IMF-imposed program which the two governments are implementing. Okay. There's been no paradigm shift. There's no new thinking on the economy and so on.
So there's no reset on that side?
Well, I wouldn't put it in those terms. Okay. What I'm simply saying is that then you have to ask yourself, why is it that the two governments are implementing the same program but are getting different results?
Yeah.
And I put it to prudence and discipline. You know, there's a lot more prudence and discipline now than there was before. But there's also another factor you cannot ignore. Commodity prices are not that bad. Of course, cocoa has taken a dip, okay? But if you look at gold, oil, and so on, commodity prices are not that bad. It is problematic to place your economic future and so on simply on commodity prices, because they can change again.
Of course, it's volatile.
And therefore you can suffer reversals and so on. Ultimately, what we need to do is to have a paradigm shift in economic development. And to go back and take a look at the 7-year development plan which the Nkrumah government tried to implement and to see how we can tweak it for now. I think that's the ultimate solution. But so far, the indicators are good, okay? But even with the good indicators, you have to understand that the rate of inflation and so on, these are statistical averages. And statistical averages do not always tell the full story.
It's going to be high and low.
They hide other things.
Yeah.
For example, if you talk about per capita income and so on, what does it really mean? You know, it's an average.
Of course.
So if in a year, 5% of the population increase their earnings by 2,000%, and 95% of the population actually get their incomes devalued, you are still likely to get favorable figures.
Exactly.
So because they are statistical averages, they have limitations, and we have to take into account those limitations.
What do you say to those who say this whole oral operation, recover all loot, is not happening as quickly as it should be?
Well, first of all, I'm one of those people who does not accept that our economic problems are the result of corruption. That's too simplistic. Why? Corruption is not Ghanaian. Corruption is a universal thing. You remember the House of Lords, when they did the investigation, they did the audit and found out that the Lords were actually using taxpayers' money to buy pornographic materials. House of Lords in the UK. Okay? So corruption is not a Ghanaian phenomenon, it's a universal phenomenon. We shouldn't create the impression that as for Ghanaians, we are so very specially corrupt and that all the problems we have is a result of corruption. It's not true. It cannot be true. I don't buy that nonsense, you know. However, I think it's important to fight corruption. Because in a way, it leads to the diversion of resources to private, enterprises. I mean, enterprises not as in business and so on, but private endeavor and so on. So it leads, and we need to correct that. I know as a fact that corruption can lead to lopsided development and so on. It's not the reason why we are poor, but it does, So I don't place a lot of emphasis on Ora, and I said this even before Mahama became president. Do you remember I gave the Atamis Memorial Lecture?
Exactly.
And when I gave the Atamis Memorial Lecture, I warned them to be very careful about the emphasis they're putting on corruption, as if once you solve the corruption problem, everything else is solved. It's not true.
What should they put the greatest emphasis on to be successful come 2029 when he hands over to the next administration?
But first of all, let me finish with this corruption bit. I believe also that even in the fight against corruption, we should respect the fundamental rights of citizens. And one of those things has to do with the fact that nobody is guilty until pronounced guilty by a competent court. So all the people against whom allegations have been made are still innocent, and they should be treated as innocent persons and should be given all the opportunity to defend themselves fully and so on. You understand? So this thing about speed, it's taking too long and so on. How is it taking too long? You have to go through a process. If the process is not exhausted, you cannot pronounce people guilty. You have to go through process. People have to have the right to defend themselves to the best of their ability and so on. So I'm not in a hurry to convict people and to lock people up in prison and so on. It doesn't work. Our main challenge today, as Ghanaian people, is what is it that we can do in order, again, to own our resources and to exploit these resources for our own benefit. That's the critical challenge. Our main challenge is how can we engage in gold production, which does not only contribute to enlarging the pockets of those who sit in the boardrooms of multinational corporations. How can we engage in gold production which would help us to improve access to education of the poor people in Ghana?
So you like the gold board idea?
What I'm saying is different from the gold board idea. Okay. Completely different. The price of gold is still determined by cartels, that we don't control. That has to change, and the gold board cannot change that. You understand?
If we start processing more here, can we take more control?
Yeah, if we start processing more, but the question I ask is that when we say that we want to start processing more gold here, what are we talking about? If we are refining gold and putting it in the vaults of our central bank, as to shore up the value of our city and so on, it would make some sense. But if you say we are adding value and we are producing trinkets and necklaces and so on, who can buy them in Ghana? Is it for export or for what? I think we need to think through all of this, properly. And I'm not sure that I have thought through it properly. But this is a national exercise that we need to do. I'm still worried about the situation in which Ghana remains the third largest importer of tomato paste from Germany. Doesn't make sense. Can't live in Ghana with the possibility of farming all year round on irrigated land and be importing tomato from Germany. And
just recently, the Burkinabés have put a ban on sending fresh tomatoes from their country out of their country. So
that's one.
Yes.
I mean, a situation in which we are importing guinea fowls from Denmark. My goodness, what happened to us? Guinea fowls? Importing guinea fowls from Denmark? That's crazy.
Wow.
That's crazy. You understand? So we need to change this. I mean, there's no reason why Ghana, which is crisscrossed by all kinds of rivers, and Cobra, Volta, and so on and so on. There's no reason why Ghana, crisscrossed by all of these rivers, where you have the Volta region, coming all the way from the northernmost part of the country and emptying into the Atlantic Ocean and so on, should be importing fish. Is there a reason? No reason. Ghana should be self-sufficient in fish production.
Galamsey is threatening our waters, though.
I do know that.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah, but so let's end Galamsey.
Yeah.
You understand?
Yeah.
That we are bordered on the south by the Atlantic Ocean, one of the biggest oceans in the world, and we import fish. It doesn't make sense.
So control our resources is the key.
Yes, I mean, have a self-reliant approach to national economic development.
Before, let me just think about it a little bit. Former administration led by President Akufo Addo, what do you think were some of his highs? What were his successes and maybe things that he didn't really perform in the 8 years that he was in power? Or his highs or his lows?
Wow, I'm struggling to find a high. Quite honestly, I'm really struggling to find a high. If you find one, mention it, then maybe we can interrogate it. What was high? Mention one, and let's interrogate it. Let's together interrogate it.
I'm in a study group now, right?
I'm really struggling.
Well,
and I see you're also struggling.
They touted free SHS as one of the achievements.
Well, to be honest with you, free education is a goal that every country must try to achieve. Expansion of the access to education is important for national development everywhere, anywhere in the world. But you see, in addition to expansion of access, I think quality is also important. Because if you are educating your population on things which mentally enslave them and so on, the free is not beneficial. So I support free education. I've always supported free education. I think it's important and so on. But at the same time, I'm worried about the quality of education, the content of education and so on. You know that we stopped teaching history as a standalone subject.
A shame.
And I'm happy you see it as a shame.
It's a shame, yeah.
So if you have an educational system which is not teaching history as a standalone subject and so on, what are you teaching the kids? What are you teaching them?
Social studies.
And to the extent that we actually began to outsource curriculum development to donor countries. And you saw the controversy about human sexuality and what to teach and what not to teach. It's simply because we outsource, we completely outsource curriculum development, So free education, yes, maybe it's a plus. Yeah, I would accept that as a plus. But a lot more needed to be done to make it achieve the objectives for which we began.
They would also say, year of return, opening the doors for our brothers and sisters in the black diaspora to come home.
Look, I think that we needn't treat the diaspora as just tourists, people who bring in money and spend, so that we can extract some value, for our development and so on. I mean, the diaspora need to be taken more seriously than that. That's my view.
Couple of quick comments from you before we wrap this up. During the COVID time, did you really say that the government needed to instill fear in the population for them to deal with COVID? Was this something that you said? I saw a comment attributed to you like that.
I don't know what is meant. I mean, if I could see the statement, then
It's just a comment. I thought just to clarify whether you actually made it.
Fear of what?
People were. It's almost like as if people were not just to control people's movements.
Yeah, but we needed to control people's movement, and one of the ways of instilling fear is just making people fully aware of the health implications of COVID, the fact that COVID could kill, and so on. That's instilling fear.
Did you get COVID?
Pardon?
Were you unfortunate?
No, I was
to get it?
I was never diagnosed with COVID.
Yeah. How did the government handle COVID back then, 2000?
Well, if you look at the fatalities and so on, Ghana recorded some of the least fatalities in the world. And to that extent, one can say that it was well handled, okay. But then there are also a number of scandals around the handling of COVID. For example, the procurement of vaccines and the scandals around it and so on. That was a minus. There were also the case of the testing for COVID at the airport. Yes. I know that there were a lot of protests about how it was done, who was the beneficiary and so on. That was also quite scandalous and so on. But by and large, because we suffered very small casualties as compared to other countries, maybe we can say that we did very well.
Have you had anybody come criticize you of being overly ideological? And that
I wouldn't consider that as a criticism. I would consider that as a compliment, as a badge of honor.
You would wear it as a badge of honor?
Yeah.
Okay. Why?
Because everything has to happen within a context. You understand? Everything has to happen within a context. So if you're overly ideological, it means that you're testing your actions against a set of principles all the time. And that's a good thing to happen.
Quick questions. If Kwame Nkrumah came back to life today, which Ghanaian leader do you think he would be most disappointed in?
Well, first of all, Kwame Nkrumah will never come back to life.
This is a thought experiment.
Yeah, but it's not a realistic experiment because Kwame Nkrumah would never come back to life.
Who do you think he would be disappointed with if he were alive?
Well, I think Kwame Nkrumah would be disappointed with all of us, everybody. One, because his dream was for a united Africa. We are nowhere near united Africa. Nkrumah's dream was for us to industrialize, to process our raw materials. We are nowhere near that. Nkrumah's dream was for every Ghanaian to get a certain level of education. We are nowhere near that. Nkrumah's dream was to improve national infrastructure, to construct a railway line from Accra to Burkina Faso to Ouagadougou. It hasn't happened. Nkrumah's dream was to build the United States of Africa. It hasn't happened, and so on.
Why? Do we blame just the coups, or it goes beyond that?
Well, because the forces which were against Nkrumah, the forces of imperialism, deliberately set us back. And they are continuing to set us back. We've not been able to defeat them yet.
Are you hopeful that things will change for the better?
They have to change. Things have to change. Otherwise, why are we here? Life is meaningful because we know and feel and hope that things will change. And things will change. They will definitely change.
If Africans rejected all these Western ideas, thoughts, which institutions would fail first on the continent? If we rejected the whole Western way of doing things, what would fail first?
I don't think that we can say that there'll be a time when everything Western will be rejected. You understand? Yes, the system of government may not be what we would use. It shouldn't be what we would apply, you know, in our circumstances and so on. But there are things which were developed in the West which may still be beneficial. I mean, Einstein. Einstein developed science in the West. The theories that Einstein developed may still be applicable in Africa. Marx and Engels developed Marxism in the West. You know, the science of Marxism may still become applicable and so on. So it's not everything that was developed in the West which needs to be jettisoned.
I'm sure if you cast your mind back over the past maybe 10 years, you realize that the young people seem to be clamoring for military rule. They've even had surveys, which Afrobarometer surveys and other surveys, which point to the fact that, or to the finding that young people seem to think that the military way of going around governing countries is preferable to democracy. What would be your reading of that trend?
Democracy is not a uniform. It's not what you wear. Democracy ought to be seen as being more meaningful than just whether or not a guy is in khaki or is not in khaki and so on. That's not the issue. Look around West Africa. Look at all the elections which have been held in West Africa. Which ones of them are free and fair?
I'd want to hope the Ghanaian ones are free and fair.
Okay.
Just because I'm a Ghanaian.
La Côte d'Ivoire. La Côte d'Ivoire. You know, so when you have elections where the outcome is based on how much money the contestants are spending, I wouldn't call that democratic.
And that's where we are now, even in Ghana.
Okay. When you have elections which outcomes are determined by the extent to which the machinery is rigged, I wouldn't call that, you know, free and fair elections. And in a lot of sense, the kind of elections we have sometimes are no better than coup d'etats. They are virtually disguised coup d'etats. A bunch of rich people come together, they put in a lot of money, they buy votes, they corrupt the electoral system, and they declare themselves winner. How better are they than the military administration? People break constitutional term limits, do as they like, and so on. I mean, these African leaders who are still contesting elections in their 80s and so on, are you not worried about that? I think we should be worried about that. I think, look, true democracy ought to be defined as governance which takes into account the genuine aspirations expressed by the people. You understand? True democracy should mean the free will of the people to choose their leaders. And true democracy should mean the pursuit of the interest of the population and so on. And I think that if we define democracy this way, we may not be confined or constrained by these definitions which really are not about democracy. I mean, in the beginning of the program, we're talking about Ibrahim Traore.
Yes.
I haven't seen any African leader as popular as he is.
Correct.
I don't see any African leader who will beat him in an election, even in their own countries. You understand? But he came to power through a coup d'etat. He's wearing the military uniform. Is that government democratic or not democratic? Who are we to decide? Especially as the people of Burkina Faso constantly keep demonstrating that he's pursuing their interest. You know, so I think that we should again apply the principle of form against content in this discussion.
Why do you think that China is so successful in terms of on the economic side, and the fact that I read a New Year message from their leader a couple of years back, and he was just touting the achievements. So we've been able to feed our people, we're doing this, we're doing that. And 50 years ago, China was economically struggling, but they seem to be doing quite well now. What's the secret there? Is there anything we can learn as Africans from China?
Well, I think they know the needs of their people, and they've managed to get a sense of what their people want, and have been able to mobilize their people to pursue a common goal.
Mm.
And that's my understanding of what the Chinese success is about. Of course, don't forget that China is a very, very big country.
Yeah.
And that China can afford to be inward. China can cut off links with all of the world and still succeed.
Because they have the big internal market that they have.
Exactly. They have the resources, they have everything, you know.
When I say the word IMF and World Bank, how do you feel?
Well, these are contraptions which were developed after the Second World War, you know, without the participation of Africans. When I was speaking earlier on about the need to reset the world and its institutions, I was referring to the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, and the IMF. They were established to pursue the interests of the West and not the African people.
Do you fear that we'll get an 18th bailout from them? We're now on number 17.
Well, the current government has said that it won't go back to the IMF for a program. I hope they keep their promise.
The former government also said same, so, and they went. So promises could be broken. Yeah.
So I hope they keep their promise.
Yeah. Yes. Yesterday I was at an event, and there was a government official who was actually he was acknowledging the development partners and said, well, I have to do it because we may not get the money if we don't acknowledge them, which I thought was a surprising thing to say.
Which government official was this?
I will not mention the name, but I found it a surprising thing to say.
I think he's completely out of place. He doesn't understand the reality that Ghana and Africa are faced with today. You know, I mean, praising so-called development partners and lying prostrate before them is not a solution to the problems that confront the African people.
Is it that we have there's a general dependency syndrome? People think that they cannot do it on their own.
Unfortunately, we have too many fools in leadership position. That's the problem.
Where are the wise men and women? They're not being selected.
Well, the system that produces leaders doesn't look for wise men and women. But you know that. I mean, you've seen all the public opinion surveys which have been conducted, the research which has been conducted, and so on. I hear that one of them says that if you want to be president of Ghana, you need $100 million. Is it $100 million or $100,000 or so? Million to be president. This system cannot produce wise men. It may produce wise people by accident, but it's designed to produce fools as leaders.
But still, we must hope.
Sure. Hope is one of the few things we've got left.
If you had to recommend somebody for me to talk to, somebody who would challenge the thinking of the audience, just like you, who would that person be?
There's so many people. Ghana has 35 million people alive.
I want your recommendation, one or two.
Just walk into the street and stop at the nearest vulcanizing shop and interview the person, and you'll be amazed what they say. They understand life better than we do. Ask them about the experiences on the streets, how they manage to feed themselves and their families, the magic they do. How much does the vulcanizer earn a day? And yet he has to pay for his rent, has to pay for the school fees of the children, has to buy electricity, pay for water, and so on. Ask them about that magic, and you'll be amazed what they tell you.
When I have that conversation, I'll come and remind you that you recommended that person.
But try that.
Yeah.
The nearest vulcanizer, or the nearest kinky seller, or anybody, and they will have amazing stories of survival to tell you. Amazing. Just the magic they do. And they do magic.
Yes, they do.
I mean, there's a kinky seller married to a vulcanizer, or a trotro driver, and between them they have 8 children. How do they feed them? There must be some magic somewhere. Do they send them to school? And if they send them to school, what school? What vision do they have? What expectation do they have of their children? How do they see themselves in the next 10 years or so? These are important questions. And you'll be surprised at the answers you get.
I thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.
It's been very educative and insightful.
Thank you, boss.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Mr.
you,
Kwesi
boss.
Pratt Jr. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. Let's meet in the comments below. My name is Kafui Dey. God bless.